What is the weirdest thing that a medical patient flat out denied? I'm a nurse. We had a patient come into the operating room for brain surgery. Probably mid-50s guy with a nice head of light brown hair. Before the patient comes into the actual operating room, we ask them a series of questions, including whether they've had implants, jewelry, non-hospital clothes, stuff like that. The guy says no to all these questions. After the patient gets put to sleep, the surgeon grabbed his hair to start shaving it off because, brain surgery. All his hair peeled off because he was wearing a wig and didn't tell us. We almost shaved his hairpiece because he wouldn't admit to anyone that he wore it. Being permanent and also having never so much as touched a man. People actually believe women can get preggers in a public pool or so after their parents did the deed in the jacuzzi, and the girl uses the jacuzzi and conceives that way. Anything but admit that they did the deed with someone in front of their parents. I'm not a doctor, but a nurse. I had a patient come in with a toothpick in his member, refused to tell me how it got there, and insisted he was picking his teeth and it just fell in. I admitted a guy for chest pain. As part of the workup, I did a urine substance screen which came back positive for using white snow. After the rest of his cardiac workup was negative, I said to him, "Good news, you didn't have a heart attack. It's likely that your chest pain was caused by using that white snow." His answer was, I didn't use that. See, I was at a party and people had some lines of it out on the table. As I was walking by, an oscillating fan blew it into my face, which is why my pee came back like that. Yeah, got it. I'm a pediatric dentist and this one throws me for a loop every time, so I'll share it. When I sedate kids, they have to be NPO for 8 hours, so I always ask if they had anything to eat or drink in the morning. Parents never want to admit their kids ate or drank, even when I remind them it's very important, because if they chuck up and aspirate, they could die. Often they try to minimize it and say it was just a few bites, but one kid walked in eating a bag of Cheetos at reception and then the parent insisted to me that they hadn't eaten. Yeah, I'm 100% not sedating your child today. I used to work PR and marketing in an inner-city hospital. I was once hanging out with the ER folks when one of our regulars came in. He had some ongoing issues that often got him hurt. This would have been 2000 or 2001 or so, and I was young, so I'd never even heard of this. The guy had spent hours burying a Phillips head screwdriver in his abdomen, carefully working it around his major organs. He was a Vietnam medic and had some training, so he could feasibly do it. He straight up said, "What screwdriver? You guys are crazy." The attending was staring right at the x-ray and the handle of the screwdriver sticking out of his abdomen. That screwdriver must have been 4 inches long. I still shudder thinking about that. My God, that's scary and honestly really sad if problems of that sort were something of a regular thing with this guy. What do you even do about that? Are you allowed to call in or recommend any sort of intervention? Would that even work? I once had a patient come in with large calluses on the front of his ankles, which is a very unusual place to get calluses. I brought it up a few times because I thought maybe he was wearing his shoe wear improperly, but he kept waving off the question. Eventually, I got him to admit that the calluses were there because he'd recently started taking a prescription antidepressant medication, which made it very difficult for him to climax. He found out that if he lay on his living room carpet with his legs bent out beneath him in a W fashion and whacked the mule for several hours, he was finally able to achieve closure. So that's how he got those calluses. Nurse here. Had parents bring their 3-year-old son to the emergency department for 1 month of abdominal pain that just kept getting worse. I ask all the routine questions for this complaint. Lots of questions about his poop. Is it bloody, diarrhea, mucus? When was his last bowel movement? Any changes in the stool? And they deny any other concerning symptoms but abdominal pain. We do blood work, ultrasound, x-ray, everything comes back completely normal, but the kid is intermittently screaming in pain, curled in a ball. Over the next 5 hours, I continue to repeat the same questions. I asked repeatedly if there was anything going on that they could think of. Nope. The kid just doesn't seem well, but we have no reason to keep him. We decide to watch him a little longer and let him eat. The kid eats a bunch, a PB&J, apple juice, crackers, popsicle. No pain, so we decide to send them home. I bring in the discharge paperwork and I'm about to start going over instructions, and the dad goes, for the past 3 months he's had a lot of worms in his number 2. Worms. Fricking worms. You spent 6 hours denying worms. I literally just turned around and walked out of the room without saying a word. I was laughing almost to the point of tears. I couldn't wait to tell my resident. deworming medications, a crap ton of wasted time, and they were on their way. I had a patient accuse me of crapping in her bed and threatening to sue me for malpractice. Keynote, she never got out of her bed. Had a patient in hospital, I forget what for. The point is that he disappeared for a few hours. When he came back, he was tachycardic to 160 beats per minute, massive pupils, and wouldn't sit still. We asked him what he'd taken while he was out. Nothing, he swears. He went to the pub and just drank lemonade. Okay, we say, we're going to take some blood and find out what you've taken. He then pipes up and says the friends he was with would probably think it was funny to spike his drink. What, we asked, did he think they might have spiked his drink with? Speed, he says. What do you know, blood confirmed that he had taken speed. But he insists he didn't take it, his drink was spiked. I'm a nurse. I had a kid once who I needed to get a urine sample from. He was 8. I gave him a cup and pointed him to the bathroom. I went to check on my other patients and came back. The kid was still in the bathroom. I go knock on the door. Hey buddy, you okay in there? I hear the sink going on full blast. Yep, everything's fine. I go back to his room a few minutes later and he hands me a bag full of water with a cup inside that also appears to be water. I pour the water out of the bag. Hey buddy, are you sure that this is pee in your cup? Yeah, my pee is always clear. The patient is wheeled off for the x-ray. I check the temperature of the so-called pee in the cup. It was, ironically, the same temperature as the water from the faucet. Come on, little homie, you gotta do better than that. Oh, this one is sad. It's from my old roommate. Girl had a very large lump on her chest that she didn't tell the doctors about. She actually went to the hospital for migraines, saying they were getting increasingly bad. When they found the lump, they asked why she didn't say she had that. She said she knew it was going to kill her eventually, but she just wanted to get rid of the migraines because they were giving her a lot of pain in her last months. I guess it's not super weird that this patient wouldn't admit this, but it's weird in the sense that it was super obvious what happened, so he might as well have. I used to do patient registration in the ER. 2 of us were wheeling around our computers and registering patients off of ambulances and getting patient information in rooms. A middle-aged guy comes in on an ambulance and my coworker takes it. So I'm finishing up some paperwork and I go to our front office and pull up the patient tracker board so I can see what still needs to be done, and a new patient pops up on the board. Chief complaint, eyeliner pens stuck in his ding-dong. My coworker walks into the office looking scarred. She explained the nurse asked him what happened and he said he slipped. She told him that doesn't seem likely, so he said he had an itch and thought it would help. We later found out from the nurse that he finally admitted that he saw it on TV and thought it would feel good. His 20-something-year-old daughter was with him, but she clearly had some form of developmental disability. It was an all-round sad situation, and I hope someone told him about sounding, and he did some research on safe practices for kinks and that sort of stuff. Apparently, they were both lodged in there pretty badly. People flat out deny when their last meal was. They think they can fool their PET scan, end up losing money, time, and over-irradiated. My God, I feel your frustration to my soul. Sir, have you eaten this morning? Nope, not since before midnight. Meanwhile, I'm looking at a sliver of contracted gallbladder. Are you sure? Because I'd hate for this test to come back incorrect and for you to end up meeting with a surgeon when you don't need to. Well, I might have had a couple of waffles and eggs. That they don't know how to read. I've been taught the trick of handing a paper upside down to them to see if they can read. It's good to know if they don't, so you can make extra sure they have a full understanding of their instructions instead of saying to read the details on the sheet. I can see why they'd not want to reveal that, and it's nice of you just to work out in advance if you have to give a super specific spiel about it, rather than shaming them for concealing this fact about themselves. I'd be a bit concerned about whether someone who can't read will be able to understand the medical terms you throw their way during the spiel, but then again, I guess you can really just break everything right down. Our patient lied about being able to see. We had this lady came into the ER at least once a month, usually for chest pain. She was in her 30s and morbidly obese. She had seen multiple specialists, had her heart, lungs, and GI system examined in almost every conceivable way. One night she comes in with sudden onset blindness. Not her first time with this complaint either. Last time she got a trip to the retina specialist. When I examined her, I walked around her bed and she tells her friend to get her feet off the chair so I could get by. She played it off super cool by adding, "If you have your feet up like you always do." Then came the neuro exam. I have her touch her nose, then touch my finger. Her idea of how a blind person would perform this exam was to touch her nose, then wobble her hand from side to side as she touched the end of my finger. Not to mention the near constant eye contact as we talked. I'd ask a question and start moving while she talked, and she would follow my eye perfectly. She was extremely relieved to find out she had conversion disorder and that her sight would be back soon. Maybe it was a factitious disorder. I tend to believe all her chest pains and crazy complaints were real feelings she was having due to a number of her social and psychological issues. In the ER at midnight, it was a lot easier to tell her it was a symptom of dealing with whatever social drama was happening with her life and that her eyes worked fine, instead of telling her she was lying to me for some gain. Either way, she was sick and needed reassurance. She was genuinely relieved, though. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. This one happened just the other day. Had a patient come in looking pretty sick. Labs and vitals said the guy was in sepsis and most likely had a bad infection. The question was where? After some prodding and letting him know the seriousness of his situation, he finally admitted to the source of his infection. He didn't want to say it, so he just pointed between his legs. Looking underneath his underwear revealed a smelly, red, swollen, pus-straining bag. Some of it was even black and necrotic. Not a pleasant sight, and it looked horribly painful. He went on to explain that he had a painful lump on one of his jewels a few weeks back. He was told it was an infection and given antibiotics. The problem didn't go away, and by then he decided to take matters into his own hands. Literally. He had tied a string around one and proceeded to cut it out himself. Needless to say, it became horribly infected and was going to require surgical intervention. Luckily, I can tell you he ended up doing okay. Once had a woman come in for a, quote, possible yeast infection. On exam, she had a glass bottle stuck in her hoo-ha filled with urine. Totally wouldn't admit it was hers or explain how it got there even after we removed it. Just kept saying, "I think this is all a prank and you put it up there." Let's see. Other than all the random things that end up in rectums accidentally, this drunk electrician with the longest drill bit I've ever seen sticking through both legs and impaling his sack in between like a gross kebab. He was so drunk he thought he broke his hip. Denied owning any drill bits or for that matter having been drinking. Most common are the numerous substance or tox screens we do that come back positive for something, and everyone is shocked and borderline offended if it got into their system. You weren't breathing, we gave you Narcan, you started breathing again, woke up and then denied you used a narcotic. Yeah, alright. Had a patient refused to admit that he swallowed a pen, even though an X-ray showed the pen in his small bowel and we took the pen out during an emergency surgery. I'm a CT tech and I was to scan a woman's abdomen for belly pain. She and her girlfriend were there. I have to have a pregnancy test. I have to have one done. I can't radiate a fetus. I even ask nuns, so no exceptions. She denies up and down that she's pregnant, and then after the test I did, it said she was. She denied it and demanded a blood test, since she was a lesbian and never does the deed with men. Well, the blood test came back positive as well, surprise, and the argument that ensued was biblical. She was arguing with her girlfriend and the nurses and the doctor. I never ended up scanning her, and they chalked up her pain to being pregnant. The look on her girlfriend's face when I said it came back positive was one I'll never forget. So many of you are saying, you shouldn't have told her in front of her significant other, and you're partially right in a way, but the patient had given her that permission, and I didn't question it. Had she not, I would have probably asked her girlfriend to leave the room. You can give anyone you deem necessary access or no access to your medical information. It's not limited to spouses. I volunteer at an ER. Prisoner shoved a ballpoint deep up his ding-dong to get out of being shanked, if I recall correctly. He insisted he had no idea how that got there. We spent hours deliberating how to get it out, and he just reaches down, still in his handcuffs, and pulls it out himself. There was a woman sent in by her family doctor for peeing some blood. We put a camera into her bladder with her awake, looking to exclude a tumor. We found her bladder full of citrus seeds and pits, so many of them. When asked why she put them there, she said, "Well, I eat a lot of fruit," and wouldn't accept any other responsibility for them being there. The going theory was that she put in a straw and pushed them down that. We thought pushing them in one at a time would be a bit scratchy, but we don't know because she never admitted to doing it. Oh, well, thank you for making me read that, as ever. 10 out of 10 would not make my insides hurt just by reading this again. Had an elderly lady from a nursing home come in super altered. She'd wake up briefly to answer questions, but then would be out like a light seconds later. Usually in this case, we assume it's from an infection or stroke, but we still asked about both legal and illicit substance use since it can cause this kind of thing. The lady claimed several times she had never taken anything other than prescribed meds. Finally, as we were about to intubate her, put her on a ventilator, since she was getting worse, we cut off her bra and out pops a little baggie with some white powder and a baby straw. We gave her some Narcan and she gasps herself awake. Even after that, it still took her a long time before she said, well, maybe I did take some from a friend. Since then, I've trusted nobody when it comes to denying substance use. I'm not saying I think everyone is a substance addict, I'm just saying if you come in acting super out of it, you're probably going to get Narcan just to cover all the bases. I'm an internal medicine resident. Had a patient with sepsis that was being seen by the urology department. When I first read his clinical history, it stated something along the lines of, infected wound in the member, patient claims he doesn't know how he got it. So I began my assessment and asked him about his wound. Indeed, he claimed he didn't know how it happened. I decided that the priority was to stabilize the patient and I made some adjustments to antibiotics and other meds. Well, the guy went downhill. The sepsis became severe even though he was on the strongest antibiotics we had and 2 different vasopressors. His blood pressure was through the floor and eventually he needed intubation and went to the ICU. He managed to survive after a complete penectomy, and about 2 weeks later, I saw him again. Turns out the guy was trying to get his dog to lick him down there and he put some peanut butter on it. Naturally, the dog bit him. He didn't seek medical help for about 2 days before the pain and fever was too much. If we knew from the beginning that the wound was inflicted that way, the antibiotic would have been different and probably would have made a difference. I feel sorry for the guy, but with a wound like that, he's lucky to be alive. I'm a nurse, not a doctor, but it's amazing how many patients lie about how much they drink. Dude, we aren't judging you. We just want to know if we need to worry about you detoxing when you come out of an open heart surgery. A lot of the comments in here seem to be about your personal doctor visits. My comment was very specifically referring to major surgery. All I'm saying is this. If you're going to land in the hospital for a significant amount of time and you're an alcoholic, it's to your benefit and safety to be honest about that, because the odds that you'll be withdrawn in your time there is high. If providers know that, they can plan to manage that so you don't withdraw. Last, sounds like a lot of you have run into crappy, judgy people in healthcare. We aren't all like that, and even the judgy ones really don't want you to detox on their shift. I can literally smell the smoke on your clothes and breath, see the nicotine stains on your fingers, and you're trying to tell me you quit smoking 10 years ago? I had a patient on our service for a heart failure exacerbation. We weren't sure why she had one now if she'd been stable for a few years prior. She also had a documented past use of smack, so we checked a urine substance screen. The screen was positive, and the next day I rounded on her. She asked me why she had the exacerbation. I told her that it was likely due to her smack use. She was shocked that I would accuse her of using. I brought up her positive test and she insisted it was a false positive and told me she must have picked up the false positive from a toilet seat. That's not how any of that works. Not a doctor, but my husband. He had a 17-year-old girl with abdominal pains come into the ER with her mum. Turns out she's in full-blown labor. She assures everyone that she can't be pregnant, she's a virgin. The baby is literally crowning right there in ER. No maternity ward was in their hospital and she was in advanced labor when she arrived. She still insisted she was a virgin. My mom is a nurse and told me about the time some lady came in for abdominal pains as well. Yep, she was pregnant and gave birth, and as soon as the baby was out, she screamed, "It's not mine!" Mom responded with, "Well, it didn't come out of me." My patient presented over several months with recurrent huge abscesses that we couldn't explain. She was in horrible pain, had to stop working. We tested for everything. Eventually, her husband called me to say that he found syringes in her medical cabinet. We think she was injecting herself with fecal matter. When the syringes were found, she stopped coming into her appointments. To those asking why, I think she has Munchausen syndrome. She wanted the attention from being sick. I started getting suspicious when she'd always get a new abscess before any court dates. For her child protection services problems, and needed a doctor's note to get out of the court date. She denies everything, and it's very hard to have someone committed unless they're regularly attempting to Control-Alt-Delete on their life. Worked in a hospital for a long time, had a patient come in who'd taken way too much smack. I was able to get him set on that front. However, he had necrotizing fasciitis in his pectoral from injecting there. He was septic and honestly a bit of a jerk. He kept trying to tell us the reason he was there was because of a motorcycle accident. We all knew, but he was in absolute denial. He eventually healed up and transferred out after a couple of months. He came back about 6 months later to say thank you to all of us and to apologize for all the lies and behavior. It seems it was enough to get him out of that life and onto a new one. I think about him now and then, and I hope he stayed clean. When I was a medical student, we had a patient on one of my rotations that was getting oral pain meds, but insisting that we switch them to a stronger IV pain medicine because they'd been getting nauseous and throwing up all of their meds. When our team rounded on the patient to check on them, we walked into the room and were quickly greeted by an eager patient that had been waiting to show us the bag they'd been throwing up in. Turns out that it was filled with a lovely mixture of number 1 and 2 and topped off with a handful of pills the patient had thrown in there to make it look like they couldn't keep the meds down. When we called them out, the patient was in total denial and tried to reason with us that it must be throw-up since it's in the throw-up bag. What's the most ridiculous or offensive thing someone has said to you? I have a prosthetic eye. While it looks pretty good, it doesn't look exactly like the other eye because, it's a prosthetic eye and all. But it's not that different and looks very natural. I was picking up some documents at a nearby store. When I took off my sunglasses, the following ensued. This lady said, "Oh, you have really bad allergies." Me? "No, ma'am, it's a prosthetic eye." No, your eye, it has allergies. You should see a doctor." "Thank you. I see plenty of doctors about it, but it's a prosthetic eye." "No, you should see an allergy doctor." At this point, I gave up and just stopped talking to her. While it was insulting, it was also just shocking that someone could be that dense. It's not that I think she didn't understand what prosthetic meant. She was middle-aged and spoke fluent English. She wasn't foreign or senile and seemed to understand what I said, but disagreed. Grr. "Why didn't you pop it out and hand it to her?" "Oh, I should have done that, but first pretended to rub it." Oh, yeah, this itch is so bad, I'm gonna have to… Oh my god! If I ever need a glass eye, I will definitely insist on creating one that has a red LED inside that I can somehow control, and make it come on as I glare at people like this. I have a prosthetic leg, and it's also very real looking, but I wear a knee support, so occasionally if I'm wearing shorts, someone will come up to me and insist I should go to the doctor to sort out my knee problems. Often people will think I'm joking when I tell them it's a false leg. One person, like the one in your story, wouldn't believe me at all and was getting quite wound up about me taking the mickey. So what I did was say, "Fine, I'll get it checked out, it actually feels a little worse today." Then I grabbed my false leg where it joins up with my real knee and acted like I was massaging it. As I did so, I gently lifted my stump about an inch out of the socket and began to twist the false leg around, going, "Ah, that feels so much better." I continued to massage and twist until the leg was completely backwards, with the foot pointing straight behind myself. Then I stretched myself up and said, "Ah, yeah, that's the stuff," and walked off with one leg facing completely backwards. The look on the guy's face was priceless and worth the discomfort of walking with my stump backward in the socket. I work in a New Yorker hotel, but I'm a native South African. A guest once asked me to see my manager because I was faking an accent to tee her off. When he confirmed that I'm not local, she rebutted that she had a South African friend who sounded nothing like me. She was quite upset. I moved from South Africa to Colorado when I was 12, and people called me a liar, saying I was faking a British accent and I was very bad at it. After that, I gave up and put on a fake American accent. What the frick? Some people are so ignorant. I would like to ask all of our South African viewers to either forgive me or join the ranks of equally annoyed people from literally any country I've tried to imitate in previous videos. I had this really dumb co-worker. Not only was she dumb, but she would constantly browbeat everyone around with her ignorance. One of her more choice contentions was that Jews ripped off Yamaha's name for their little hat thingies. I have no idea how she rationalizes that. My ex-mother-in-law used to always give me these backhanded compliments. For example, "Oh, you got bangs, they really soften your face." Or, "Were you once really fat? You just have the kind of body that looks like it was once fat." My dachshund has half blue eyes. It often comes up in conversation when he's out in public, like at a dog park. One time, a lady asked me about his eyes. I was ready for the normal conversation. "No, it's not common. Yes, it's a sign of inbreeding." Instead, she insists that he's part husky. My dachshund. My 12-pound dachshund that looks like a dachshund. I tried to explain to her that there were other dog breeds, like dachshunds, that sometimes have blue eyes. Nope, my dog was part husky, but only in the eyes, because that's how it works. My Spanish teacher, she taught Spanish and German, and the rest of the class kept trying to talk to me in German and pronounce my name with a horrendous German accent because I have blonde hair and blue eyes. After a few minutes, I caught on and said, "Actually, I'm a second-generation Hungarian-American, and I have no idea what you guys are saying." They refused to believe that was a country and insisted that if it was, it must be the same thing as Germany due to my appearance. I was born in Ohio and lived in the middle of a very Italian neighborhood. I was the only person with very pale skin and light features. A guy in a classroom of 13-year-old kids explained that it's his honest opinion that I should do my part in making the world a better place by taking my own life because I'm gay. So I ask, who else thinks that people like me should take their own lives? And 95% of the classroom raised their hand. Biggest what the frick moment I've experienced so far. What the frick? Where was this? It was in the Netherlands. Although the laws are good and most people are good, we're not the gay nirvana that foreigners sometimes believe it to be. I hear this many times from foreign gays who moved here. That incident is an outlier, of course, and the kids were just following the macho guy in the class. Don't let it bug you. Kids are freaking stupid and just don't understand, so they say what they do to fit in with all the other idiot morons. I always wondered why older people hate teenagers when I was one, but now that I'm older, I'm only 25, I've realized why. I freaking hate teenagers. I think they're all a bunch of annoying, repetitive buttholes. Almost every single one of them will regret saying that in about 10 to 15 years. I know how bad I feel about being a jerk and a bully at that age. I'm albino, and I have vision problems because of it. I have to look at things very closely to read them. In high school, my French class had a substitute teacher. We were all quietly working on some homework, and of course, I was reading my book very close to my face. The substitute comes up to me and proceeds to tell me that I should really get glasses, not something that will fix my eyes. I try to explain to him that this isn't something that will help. Usually people leave me alone after I tell them this, but he kept going. The entire class was listening, and it was kind of mortifying, as my vision is something that has always made me feel slightly awkward and embarrassed. I finally said to him, "If you don't stop harassing me, I'm walking out right now, and trust me, I will not be the one getting in trouble for it." He shut up, but kept glancing my way for the rest of the class. In conclusion, I have crappy vision that can't be corrected, and someone was harassing me, telling me that it could be, and that I just needed glasses. We had a moment a bit like that with one of my friends who's colorblind. In a geography lesson, we were coloring in a map, and he colored the water purple accidentally. This was not long after we went to high school, so the teachers didn't really know about it yet, and the teacher then proceeds to accuse him of taking the mickey and threatening to speak to the head of the year about it. Many moons ago in Walmart, I asked an employee where they had the World of Warcraft game cards. A nearby middle-aged customer asked me in his most condescending voice, "How old are you?" My reply was, "Old enough to mind my own business. How about you?" Zing! Got him. As a gamer well into his adult years who loves board games and D&D, I thank you for your defense of our kind, good sir. When someone said, "I stopped being your friend because I didn't think celiac disease was a real thing." English class, senior year of high school. There was one dense B word that refused to believe that Venezuela, where I'm from, is an actual country. She was convinced it was a city in Mexico. End of the year, we have to hand in our papers. Now, this is high school, and I didn't really give a crap. I bullcrapped a 10-page paper, and apparently I've got some talent at writing essays, so I could usually bluff my way to a B or even an A. She sat next to me and was complaining that she did so much research and how unfair it was that she got a C. I got mine back, and she asks how I did. I handed her the paper, and she saw that I got an 85. She looked at it for a second, got up, walked over to the teacher, and accused me of plagiarism because he's Mexican, there's no way he could have written a better paper than me without cheating. Oy. It's alright, bro. Someone once asked me what part of Mexico Puerto Rico is in. There was a map right behind me. You should have said the Atlantic Ocean part. My hair color is light brown, but when my beard or facial hair grows in, it grows in red. I used to be a busboy at a fancy restaurant near the Cleveland airport, and I was working Sunday brunch. Well, it started to get towards the end of the brunch, and this guy was sitting at a table near some others that I was currently cleaning. He's on his Bluetooth headset, mid-conversation, and without even skipping a beat, says to his friend, "Hold on, one moment." Then he looks at me and says, "Excuse me, but are you Amish?" "You know, because your facial hair is red." I wasn't so much offended as I was thrown off guard. I looked at him with a half-fake smile and said, "No, sir, I'm not Amish. My facial hair just grows in red." The only part I have trouble reconciling is that there would be a fancy restaurant in Cleveland. My mother was friends with two sisters who were both wonderful people. One had an amazing singing voice and was very well known for this, while the other had a prosthetic leg from a childhood accident. One day, the sister with the prosthetic leg was approached from someone who asked, "So are you the one with the leg or the one that can't sing?" Our jaws dropped. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I have a yeast allergy, so I can't have beer. I learned this when I was in high school and went to an allergist to get tested for food and environmental allergies. The doctor had drawn a circle on my arm and pricked me with the test for yeast, and in the time it took her to turn around to pick up the next allergen and turn back, the test site had swollen as large as the circle she had drawn and was getting bigger. The first thing she said was, "Whoa, no beer for you." So clearly it's a severe allergy. Anyways, every time I go out with new people to the bar, I have to explain why I can't go in on a pitcher or a bucket, and that doesn't really bother me. They don't know, and it's a good conversation starter to fall back on with new people. But what bugs me is the 1 person out of 10 that then persists in trying to get me to drink beer anyway. All night. They use arguments like, "If you've never drank beer, how do you know how you'll react?" and "Oh my god, your life will never be complete unless you drink beer with me right now." Or, "Are you sure? My cousin's brother-in-law's friend is allergic to gluten, but he can still have this beer." If I can't tell you that I can't have beer because I have a serious allergy, do you really want me to ruin the night for everybody by requiring emergency medical care? I have an ethanol allergy, and it's infuriating how many people don't believe it. They think I'm lying and I get insulted because they think I have a moral objection to drinking, and that I think I'm better than they are, like my refusal to drink is a judgment against them. Or waitstaff that don't bother to tell the chef, and chefs that are insulted and cook the dish their way anyway. And then I'm in anaphylaxis because they took it personally. It's amazing how people think they know someone else's body better than they do themselves. My brother calls me an alligator during fights because of my eczema. I hope you bite him really hard, then drag him into a nearby pond. That'll show him. Don't forget to do a barrel roll. Seriously, that's their freaking jam. That's how they kill things. Mine calls me a crocodile because of my smack addiction. I'm a Jewish girl with extremely pale skin and bright blue eyes. People who don't know about my cultural or religious background often describe them as Aryan eyes. My significant other gets this a lot whenever she goes on holiday. People are D-bags and I frickin' hate it. But if the person's American, you can always turn it on their head and say, "So by that logic, you murder Native Americans and steal their land because that's what your ancestor was probably doing as well." Hey, that's not fair. Don't forget the slaves too. I'm living for all the saltiness in this group of stories today. More to come from our slighted kings and queens. I have something called cold urticaria, a skin allergy that causes me to develop hives when my skin is cold, and I've had it since I was 2 years old. It's not nearly as severe as it was when I was a kid. It almost killed me twice because I live in Wisconsin, but since it hadn't mostly resolved itself until my late teens, I was disqualified to donate blood plasma. So I'm a bit disappointed, make a status on my Facebook about it, and my aunt comments on it and we talk to each other for a bit. At the time, I worked at McDonald's, and I had a manager who was a bit of a know-it-all F-face, who liked to act knowledgeable about things he knew absolutely nothing about. Sometimes he'd spout off some crappy lecture for the heck of it, without even knowing what the frick he was talking about. I think he just liked to hear the sound of his own voice. Anyway, he saw my status and conversation on Facebook, and while we and a few other co-workers were all talking about something unrelated, he brings up, "So I saw on Facebook that you couldn't donate plasma." Yeah, I'm allergic to the cold and it drops your body temperature, so I was disqualified from donating. That's stupid, you can't be allergic to something like that. He then proceeded to try and argue with me about it, telling me that my parents were hypochondriacs, telling me my doctors were stupid, saying that an allergy like that doesn't exist, saying that if I have anything, it would have been eczema. I mean, frick, if that particular allergy didn't exist, I would have been able to donate my gosh darn fricking plasma. And then there's the fact that he had the nerve to try and call me out on that in front of all our co-workers, to try and make me look like a stupid liar. That teed me off so bad I wanted to stick his stupid face in the gosh darn deep fryer. Ugh, just thinking about it right now is teeing me off. Then later, after failing to make me look like a moron in front of everyone, because multiple people were backing me up, knowing what a dill hole he is, He tried to make it so I wasn't teed off at him anymore and convinced me to agree to disagree. That night, I deleted him off my Facebook so he wouldn't try to pull crap like that again. Just writing this story makes me so mad. I want to drive over there, see if he's working, and punch him in the face. I mean, this wasn't the only thing he did that teed me off. He was generally really obnoxious and annoying, and the only manager I had at that workplace that really teed me off all the time. Gosh darn it, what a moron. In a class in college, we were talking about organ transplants, and the professor asked if anybody had any personal stories about it. And I said I had a liver transplant and told a bit of my story. A girl, after, raised her hand and said, "I think we should stop everything like that because the world is overpopulated as it is." I stared, completely in shock that she'd say that right after I said I would have died years ago if it wasn't for a transplant. I think it would have been appropriate to stand up, point at her, and say, "Frick you too, madam." Bet the professor wouldn't have even been that annoyed. When I was a kid, I crashed into a set of trees while sledding. The trees were so slim that my leg got twisted around them. It took a few minutes for my sister and nephews to get it out, and all the while I'm screaming and crying. I hobble inside the house, freaking out because the pain was so bad I thought it was broken. I go to my parents for help, and they took one look at me and say, "Stop whining, it doesn't hurt," and went off to do what they were previously doing. I collapsed from the pain and had to go crawl up the stairs to my room. All the while, my stepmom's standing over me, calling me a faker and a liar, and telling me to stop being so dramatic. I ended up passing out in the upstairs living room from the pain and dizziness. My leg wasn't broken, but I think it did get somewhat effed up, since I walk with a limp to this day. Gosh darn, you're still doing that fake limp thing? Drama queens. I mean, really? Sincerely, your stepmom. While giving my information to a store so I could rent video games. The store employer, name, me, Diana, yes, that's my real name, proceeded to spell my name. Are you sure? Doesn't it have 2 N's? No, just the one. Are you sure? I hand her my driver's license. Pretty darn tootin'. Oh, okay. I have a good one. My grandmother who has Alzheimer's disease lives with us, and she recently had a UTI. While in the hospital, she had a permanent catheter installed, and when she finally came home, a nurse, a bit of a B-word I might add, came and showed my parents how to empty her bag. The nurse claimed that my grandma didn't have Alzheimer's, but was confused because memory loss can be apparently a symptom of a UTI. Even after my parents showed the nurse documentation, she still persisted. It was enough to mildly tee off my dad and upset my mum. I hid the fact that I was deeply mentally unwell and was on medication from my mum for months because I knew she wouldn't handle it well. When I did tell her about it, she said that I was faking it and using it as an excuse for my poor grades, which happened because of how severe my depression was. She told me that I was using my medication as a crutch. This is from the woman who's trying to use her medicated bipolar to get into disability allowance. My name is Eli. Everyone insists on calling me Elijah even when I say my name is just Eli. One of my coworkers will comment on how Asian my hairstyle or outfit was on any given day, complete with appreciative leers when I look more Asian than usual. I'm a little curious as to what that coworker in question feels would be particularly Asian attire, I'm going to be honest. My name is Ian. Simple, right? I-A-N. Nope, not apparently. The most common spelling of my name when I tell it to people is E-A-N, followed by just E-N and E-U-M. I don't have a speech impediment or anything. The worst was E-E-Y-U-M. Eeyum. Not one letter was correct. Not one. I had a coworker named Earl. He once cut a letter addressed to Fartle. When I was 3, I got a huge cut from an accident in my house. I can't remember. And when I was taken to hospital, my parents actually had the piece of skin that was torn off. Only God knows why, and there was enough of the skin to sew it back on with stitches. So now I have a huge scar. One day, a D-bag friend of mine asked me about my scar, and I tell him the above story. Then he proceeded to go on a 10-minute rant about how medical technology has not advanced far enough to do a procedure like that. I lose all hope in humanity at this point for people living under rocks like this. I broke my foot in 2 places in October. I was sitting down on the floor in gym before class because I was exhausted. Some girl walked up to me and kicked me as hard as she could on my boot. I was bawling, and all she could say was, "I wanted to see if it was really broken." She ended up re-breaking my foot and setting my recovery back 2 months. Although it doesn't happen often, as a Japanese American, I get occasional crap about the atrocities Japan committed during World War II. It doesn't make much sense considering my great-grandparents came to the US around 1900 to 1920. Also, my grandfathers both fought in the US Army during the war too, the 442nd Segregated Regiment. Not really offensive, but ridiculous. Her, where did you adopt your kids from? Me, I didn't. Then where did you get them? I made them, with my wife. Explanation, my wife is Chinese while I'm one of many flavors of vanilla, so my kids look Asian-ish. When I talk to someone on the late bus in 7th grade, I find it's fun to communicate with the losers, said the girl. Frick you, Melissa. That set back the recovery of my social anxiety by a few years. Congrats on getting knocked up at 19. A coworker of mine, who'd started working probably a couple of weeks prior to this, asked me out of the blue and all of a sudden, "So, are you like trans or something?" What offended me wasn't that she thought I looked like MTF, or the possibility of someone seeing me as trans, it was that she saw a tall, flat-chested, homely girl and reasoned that the girl must have been born a boy. Also, who asks a stranger something so personal in the first place? What is something you or someone you saw did, just to watch the world burn? I'm a high school science teacher. At least once a year we'll start a rumor about one of us getting arrested for something. A coworker of mine told some students that I dressed up as Selena Gomez for Halloween once. It's been over a year and I still get kids that like to yell, "Hi Selena!" I also toot while walking by students who I don't like for whatever reason. Crop dusting crappy students is one of my favorite parts of being a teacher. For a while I had a townhouse where I had a bathroom window that overlooked the parking lot. Sometimes I would sit there with my key fob and hit the lock button so that the horn on my car would honk right when people walked by, just to watch them jump. In the early 90s, universal remote controls were new. I had a grudge against a local AV store, so I got one of the programmable remotes, and in the middle of the night I turned on everything in the store through the window and upped all the volumes to max. Once a week for months on end. Oh, I had a buddy that did this in high school. Whenever the teacher would attempt to show a movie in class, he'd use the universal remote to turn the TV off just as the teacher sat down. She was convinced the TV was haunted. You can buy a code-free universal remote that fits on your keyring. I had one and it was pretty handy at bars. My friend's girlfriend was complaining on Facebook about vomiting and feeling nauseous. I made a joke teasing her about morning sickness and congratulating her on the baby. The next hour had her wall blowing up with family and friends who took it seriously, congratulating her. Needless to say, I got a good laugh. This is a very bold move, and I'm sick because I kind of love how messed up it is. I wonder if her parents were friends with her on Facebook. A reply to this follows. Dude, this Christmas I had most of my family over for dinner, and out of nowhere, Cousin A went up to Cousin B, touched her belly and said, "How's the baby going?" jokingly. Cousin B froze, and it turns out she really was pregnant and planning on announcing it that night. Take a piece of paper and spread a thin layer of corn flour on the paper. Slide the piece of paper under a door and use a can of compressed air to blow the corn flour off the paper and onto everything on the other side of the door. The person who enters the room will find a thin layer of the powder coating quite a bit of the room. When they go to clean it up, they will inevitably use a damp cloth, and that is when the magic occurs. If you've ever played with corn flour and water, you know it becomes a non-Newtonian fluid, and these properties make it a nightmare to clean up. When you apply pressure, it's this stubborn, gloopy solid mess on the wall, but when you release the pressure, it starts to freely run down the wall like a liquid. Every Christmas, I take an ugly ornament off our tree and put it on someone else's, usually during a party or something. I have yet to be caught. One time I did something to watch the world burn and it completely backfired in my face. It was the worst prank in the history of my life. I was a dumb child. I got superglue and I went around my house gluing down things that I thought people would rarely use. Top shelf picture frame, old scarf in my mum's bottom drawer, dictionary on the bookshelf, etc. About 20 things in total. I thought that people would come across these things over the course of months, that they would become confused and not understand how it kept happening. It was going to be my secret glory. My mum came across every single item in the course of a day. She cleans the house a lot more often than I anticipated. It was bad. Real bad. Most of the guys on the team I work with are quite overweight and have different opinions on weight loss. They also love being right. It's pretty simple to say, does, insert food here, make you, insert random weight or loss gain symptom here, and then wait for the argument to explode, and put my headphones back on whilst they argue. I work in a pizza shop. Every time someone orders 10 wings, I always put in 11, just hoping that whoever ordered those wings plans on splitting them evenly. And I've just started a war within the household over who gets that last wing. If I ordered chicken wings and got an extra one free, I would just think the guy who made them was being nice for no reason other than that he's a nice guy. I go onto random YouTube videos and write the word fake when it clearly isn't and just watch the crap storm that develops. I stole an entire place setting from the old spaghetti factory one piece at a time. A salad plate, dinner plate, bowl, glass, spoon, fork, knife, and even a bread knife. It took months. Then one day I went there for dinner with everything in a messenger bag, right before I left it set up on the table. Whenever I visit a friend or a relative's place, I turn the magnets on their fridge upside down. Never been caught. I have, however, heard complaints of, "Someone keeps turning my gosh darn magnets upside down," once or twice. Lived in a neighborhood called Caroline Pines. One night we switched the E and the I on the sign to make Caroline word for male anatomy. Stayed like that for 4 days. My buddy used to live in a neighborhood called Bantam Woods, and we got hammered one night and changed it to Batman Woods. Should have changed it to Batman's Wood. In junior year of high school, my class was given a 200-question test to do in an hour and a half. Some kid convinced everyone to white out the corner of the Scantron, so the professor had to mark every single answer by hand in a class of 30. He had to do it, and the average was 84. Something like this happened at my school, and the teacher failed every test. In 4th grade, I created a club called the Safety Patrol Busters. I'm not sure how common safety patrol kids are, or if it's still done, but they were the kids who volunteered to make sure other kids weren't doing anything unsafe, like running. If they caught you running, they'd yell at you to stop and go back and walk. During recess, me and the other boys in the club would seek out the safety patrol kids in their orange vests and run as fast as we could past them. When they yelled stop, we'd keep running. This would usually cause them to give chase. We had this secret hiding spot underneath the portable classroom buildings, trailers, where we'd hide out and watch them try to find us. They never caught the safety patrol busters, ever. I don't mean to be that kind of jerk, but when I was 17, I decided to go and buy some groceries at a Giant store or some equivalent. As I walked around, I saw some very strict-looking mums, and I had the brilliant idea of putting some random unhealthy food in their shopping carts, unnoticed, and let the kids take the blame. I thought I'd see what the mums would do. These mums, I could hear them from 2 aisles away, screaming at their children as they all denied putting the 6-pack of chocolate pudding, or 2 packs of Mountain Dew, or 4 boxes of Lucky Charms in the shopping cart. Senior year of high school, I taught 3 kids how to use any phone on campus to page over the loudspeakers. That was a hilarious week. To those curious, my school had an odd PA setup that could be used via punching in the correct extension from one of the school phones. I don't know why it was set up this way. The teachers didn't use it, probably weren't allowed, and the morning announcements were always done from the office where the actual PA mic was. Obviously, they've since changed this. I would pay actual money to hear the announcements. I know that, being kids, there was a high likelihood that it was just tooting noises and words for anatomy, but they can also be very creative in ways that we can't. I know that when I've worked with kids, they've nearly killed me laughing several times. I work at Disney World, that's the one in Florida. I found a list of the phone numbers to all the rides at Disneyland, California. I used to dial the Dumbo ride in Florida, and then before they answered, conference to the Dumbo ride in California. Both would answer, "Dumbo, this is so-and-so," and I'd just sit on mute, listening to them trying to figure out who the real so-and-so working at Dumbo was. No one ever said, "Wait, are you in Florida or California?" Put Skittles and M&Ms in the same bowl. They are appropriate snacks at some parties, as you now have S&Ms. My daughter has amazing hand-eye coordination and can throw with scary accuracy. We're a family that loses our crap when people in movie theaters talk or text or make noise. Some guy a few rows ahead kept pulling out his phone to check Facebook during the movie. I dared my daughter to throw a milk dud at his phone, and she hit it each time he pulled it out. Finally, he stopped. Then he put his feet up on the seat ahead of him where another person was sitting, so she started pelting his foot. Eventually, he sat like a perfect gentleman with nary a movement or phone check. This doesn't sound like watching the world burn, but rather keeping the world from burning. Good story, though. I jaywalked yesterday while a parking cop watched. I made eye contact. I built a dummy when I was 10 or so. My friends and I would stand in the front yard with it, wait until a car came by, and then beat the crap out of it. We'd tear his head off or put him in a hangman's noose and throw him in the street. He was about our size too, so people usually thought we were beating up another kid. They'd slam on the brakes or get out of the car to chew us out. One time we attached his hands to the second-story windowsill so it looked like he was hanging on for dear life, and some lady called 911. That was the end of that. We had an empty block of land next door to our house when I was a teenager, with a tall fence across the front. I used to drag our trampoline over to the fence, climb onto the neighbor's adjoining brick fence and wait for someone to walk past before yelling, "Swan dive!" and doing one onto the trampoline. From their perspective, it looked like I was doing a belly flop onto solid ground, and I never failed to get a reaction. In middle school, we would have a bathroom break right after lunch every day. When we went to do our business, a kid in my class started laughing maniacally while peeing in one of the urinals and proceeded to aim his pee into the corner of the bathroom. He kept laughing as his pee covered the floor, and for some freaking reason, 3 other kids started doing the same thing. By the time they were done, there was a pool covering about a third of the floor space. That would have been bad enough, but then 4 of them started to jump around and splash people. Fricking kids. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I worked as a camp counselor for a long time, and when I was supervising a big area alone, I'd bring all of my water guns. I hate participating in water fights, but I love watching them. My favorite thing to do is to give a water gun to one kid and encourage them to be as obnoxious as possible, watching while everyone else in the area grows to slowly hate them. Then I'll start passing them out to the other obnoxious kids and build my own little squad of terror. But the real fun comes when I engineer their demise by slowly arming a resistance against them. Brother begins turning on brother, and I watch like Caligula atop my tall rock, dry and sipping bug juice. The goal is to have a full-on war breakout by the time someone else is supposed to take over for me. In my 8th grade English class, we occasionally critiqued each other's assignments by leaving a comment on the back and then passing it to the person next to us, until everyone had reviewed each paper. One day, I decided to write "I heart Brandon," I'm Brandon, on every single paper. Eventually, my teacher noticed and got really upset that someone wasn't taking the task seriously. She instantly accused my girlfriend, who happened to be in the class and was always doodling girly stuff on her binder instead of paying attention. My girlfriend, full of adolescent emotions, erupted into tears while proclaiming her innocence. After a moment, my girlfriend's tears of embarrassment turned into tears of rage when she realized that if she hadn't written the message, another girl probably had. She got up out of her chair and started yelling and pointing at another girl, accusing her of trying to break us up. The other girl denied doing it and then started firing vulgar insults right back at my girlfriend. At this point, everyone in the class was yelling and cheering on the verbal slugfest, until eventually my teacher got everyone under control. Needless to say, I could have stopped the ordeal at any moment. I still smile just thinking about it. I worked as a wilderness guide this summer. Among my duties was packing food for the kids, ages 14 through 18, whom I would bring into the wilderness for 5 to 10 days. Every meal, chewy granola bars were involved. I would always pack 11, for 12 kids, of the same flavor, usually s'mores, and then one wild card. The kids would get so sick of the s'mores by day 2 or 3, and it was the funniest thing in the world to watch them fight over the special flavor. Real Lord of the Flies stuff. There are 2 break rooms on my floor at work, and each of them has a few cupboards full of dishes and coffee cups. Each break room pretty much is the same distance from my cubicle. Each day I make a cup of tea in one break room, and when done, I put it in the other's dishwasher. I roped in a coworker who sits next to me to do this as well. It was only a matter of a few weeks before people were complaining about how one break room had way too many coffee cups, and the other one always had none. Near the end of the school year, I found a stash of permanent markers in the staff room of the elementary school in which I taught. This school required all students to remove outdoor footwear and place them on shelves near the exits. On the last day of school, I put a gift marker in each shoe. After school, I relaxed on the playground and watched. At any instant, I could see all of the stages of the prank play out. The surprised discovery, the opening and testing of the pen, the tentative line drawn down the stair rail, and the expanding cloud of graffiti spreading out from each doorway. I have two really crappy roommates. They won't clean, they use my crap all the time, play music and video games really loud until 4 a.m. sometimes. Anyway, I like to mess with them a lot by doing little things to annoy them. For instance, one of them is really short and I'm 6'4", so sometimes I put stuff that he uses a lot on really high shelves or places where he can't see them. One of them is constantly playing my Xbox on my TV, even when I want to play, so one time before I went out of town for the weekend, I put clear tape over the CD drive so it wouldn't open, and it actually just looked really like the Xbox broke. So that was fun. When I came back, it magically worked perfectly. Just little things to annoy them until I can get the frick out of there. I had a big tub full of jelly beans when I was a kid, and my cousin dumped in a bag of those Harry Potter ones with flavors like grass and booger. There weren't a lot of them, but there were enough that every once in a while you would unexpectedly gag. I don't know if any of our listeners are old enough to remember these, but the Bertie Bott's every flavor beans were absolutely disgusting. If you did this in a communal bowl of jelly beans rather than one's relatives, you would raise hell. I hold the doors open for people who are more than 7 feet away just to watch them do that stupid half jog. I really enjoy it when they thank me through gritted teeth and labored breath. I love when people do this. I intentionally walk slower just to be that guy. I've had people give up and just let go of the door and walk away. This doesn't work for me. I love making situations awkward, so I will stand there with an awkward smile on my face. I might even do an awkward half wave and call you Jeff. One day, while living in a house with 4 other roommates, a hat blew into our yard and landed on the back step, which was the main entrance. It was upright on the bottom step, like someone had placed it there. All of us thought it was weird and moved on with our lives. That same week, I went to the thrift store and bought all the weirdest cheap hats I could find. Each Tuesday, I would place an increasingly weirder hat on the back porch on my way to class. Our landlord's conspiracy theories ranged from the Mad Hatter to homeless people to one of our friends leaving the hats. I kept this up until we had a collection of 30-plus hats in our closet. They didn't believe that it was me when I told them. Fake items boxes or bananas on the ramp for the shortcut in Cooper Trooper Beach. That is just messed up. Singapore is a weird place. It's an especially weird place for an American teen. An even weirder time when our classmate was arrested at our school and was caned. Well, Singaporeans tend to be reserved and not very outgoing. We Americans were generally more outgoing, and sometimes we used to make Singaporeans uncomfortable. For example, the bus stop was about half a mile from my house. On the way, we'd walked by a big house with a few guards. My friend was with me and told me the Prime Minister lived there. Again, really small country. So we walked up to the guards and started to shake their hands and just started talking to them. They were so flustered and confused, because no one has ever done that. We weren't threatening anyone, it was just us two and we were really friendly. It was the middle of the day and we were just 16 and posed no threat. It's a normal neighborhood after all, and we had backpacks on and school uniforms. After about 3 minutes, they were extremely nervous, because they weren't trained for this. Seeing a trained guard meant to handle threats, not having any idea what to do with people being friendly to him, was unbelievably hilarious to us. We had our fun and we left. I invited both the conservatives and the liberal groups at my university to the same pub during the 2012 US presidential elections. Fisticuffs were had. When I worked at the school cafeteria, I learned my fellow college students treated cafe workers like crap. So since it was my job to keep the salad bar stocked, I never ever put the low-fat options out. It's like the dumbest act of passive aggression I ever did, but I really hoped some of those buttholes got big. I used to white out the page numbers in my school textbooks, usually in large groups of 20 or 30 pages. I always choose the middle urinal. My friend has a wife that has a bit of a jealous streak. One day, while I was hanging out at his place, we were arguing about something and he made a pretty personal insult. So I turned to his wife and say, "Hey, did he ever tell you about Rebecca?" He shot up off the couch with a look on his face that I can only describe as a combination of fear, anger, and a desire to murder me and started yelling, "He's a fricking liar! Don't believe a word he says!" The guy was being a royal prick to me and everyone around him, just a loud D-bag. It was at a local resale store, and I was holding this old 90s VHS video recorder, and when he saw it, he went apecrap over wanting it so bad. He even tried to take it out of my hands at one point, which almost got his butt kicked 6 ways to Sunday. Well, I didn't even really want it, but I paid $20 for it. This guy wanted it so badly he followed me outside and offered something like $40 for it, and that I would be stupid not to take it. I didn't say a gosh darn word. I stared his butt down for about 5 seconds before walking to the dumpster by the side of the building. Just with all of my force and all of my might, I spiked that fricking VHS down into the empty metal dumpster. It hit with such force, lots of little plastic and metal bits came flying up, and that recorder was effed. The look on his face made it so worth it. I started laughing hysterically all the way to my car, and as I was driving away, he was still just open-mouthed and staring at me. I lost my voice the next day from laughing for so long and so hard. The KLF, an extremely successful British acid house duo, ended up with about £1 million on their hands. What did they do? They took it to an island off Scotland and burned it. I think the most normal thing one can do to ensure the world burns is deny climate change. In high school, we went around late at night during an election and swapped people's lawn signs with one from the other party. I'm a line cook at a restaurant, and just a few months after starting there, we went through some major management changes. The proprietor had just quit and the head chef fired under questionable circumstances. A lot of the staff seemed pretty loyal to them and felt more like family. The days and weeks that followed were filled with hot tempers and a lot of women crying. One morning, a new lady chef was making herself a cup of coffee and commented that it tasted funny, concluding she hadn't rinsed the pot out well enough. Nobody thinks anything of it, and we continue about our workday. I'm working the next morning, and one of the prep cooks noticed that something he's cooking tasted funny, and I remembered about the coffee from the morning before. After an investigation, he concludes that someone had mixed powdered laundry soap in the big bin of sugar. Thousands and thousands of dollars of food were thrown out that morning. Everything made in the past few days with sugar. Nobody knows if and how many customers were served tainted food, but authorities were notified, and ultimately no cases of illness came up. It's a pretty unanimous opinion that a prep cook who had quit a few days before was the culprit, but to my knowledge, no charges have been filed. What are your worst college roommate horror stories? When I was a freshman, my roommate basically had his girlfriend, whose own room was on our floor, move into our small dorm. They were banging all the time for 4 solid months. I'm waking up, they're screwing. Go to sleep, screwing. Get back from class, they're screwing. It was completely out of hand. It was every day at least 5 times for months. There were empty bulk protection boxes everywhere on his side. I basically couldn't be in my room. One day, I just wanted to come home from a long day, sit down and play Mortal Kombat with my friends in my room. But you guessed it, my room was locked. I went to our lounge, dejected, and told my friends, I really just want to walk in there, sit down and play just to spite them. One friend looked up at me and said, "Why don't you?" I was shocked. Then I nodded and said, "Yeah, why don't I? Let's go, boys." So without even knocking, 12 people followed me as I unlocked the door, walked in, refused to acknowledge them, turned on my Xbox, and we played for hours. They just sat there for a while dumbfounded. That's the same week I changed rooms. Next one wasn't too much better, but at least I could be in it. My roommate kidnapped 2 guys and held them for ransom. One hostage was set free weeks later, while the other wasn't so lucky. The body was eventually found in a basement, buried in the ground. I rented a room in an apartment there. He lived in it before I moved in. So the cops busted in and apprehended my roommate while he was sleeping. Tried for kidnapping and manslaughter along with a few of his other associates. This was in Ontario, Canada, around 2011-2012. I never really followed the story until after I moved the heck out, and then I learned that they were all in jail. My roommate was Sahib Malik. He seemed like a normal, nice guy. Student at the local university. Had no problems with him, aside from him using my kitchen knife without permission. My cousin is an international college student who had just moved here and barely spoke any English. He moved in with another roommate to offset the ridiculous cost of a New York apartment. His roommate met a pretty cute girl. However, he discussed it with my cousin and agreed that there was something odd about the girl. He didn't want to fully commit to a relationship just yet, but they still hooked up. My cousin also said that his roommate still talked to other girls but didn't move further than that. One day, my cousin and his roommate were having breakfast in the kitchen. The girl had slept over the night before. The girl wakes up and goes into the kitchen and picks up a knife and then stabs the roommate in the neck 3 times. My cousin freezes in shock but then picks up his chair and tried to fend her away. She then takes the knife and stabs herself in the chest. Everyone survives. My cousin cried and called my dad, telling him he hates America and wants to go back to China. Well, that went a million times further than I think any of us could have predicted. As a non-American, I can neither confirm nor deny whether insane crimes of passion are a regular thing in the student dorms there. She got mad when I moved her clothes to the dryer after they'd been sitting in the washer for a day and a half. I just set their wet clothes on top of the dryer if they didn't move them in a timely manner. If they complained, I'd just tell them I didn't know what in their wash was dryer safe. Besides, it was likely when my wash was done, their clothes would still be in the dryer anyways. I'm in college and my roommate currently likes to crank it and leave his used splooge tissues all over the floor. I've told him to clean up after himself a million times. No flushing or throwing them away. It grosses me out so bad, and I never bring my girlfriend to the house because of it. Buy some tongs. The next time you see one, put it in a random place. Shove one in his shoe. Put some in his backpack, in the pockets of his jeans or sweaters, in between his bedsheets. Get creative, man. The B-word didn't pay rent for 3 months, and we didn't know until after our lease was up. Was just resolved 6 months ago, and I graduated 2 years ago. I will never sign a joint lease again. I had a roommate that would mix booze and pills. One night, she fell asleep with her adult fun toy doing its thing. She woke up when the batteries ran out. At least she had some fun dreams. I've never resided in a college dorm, but I just wanted to share that once I was in a Skype call with my good friend who does reside in a dorm, who left his mic on when he left for an extended period of time, allowing me and the other 2 people in our call to hear all his roommates, like 5 other guys, arguing about who ate the last Pop-Tart. It got pretty intense. Is this what dorm life is like? Freshman year college had bunk beds. Drunk roommate comes home before me. He sleeps on top. He drank too much, and he wet the bed. Like an open fire hydrant, apparently. I came home later and sat down in a flash flood puddle in my completely soaked mattress. Here's how it went. I got home, sat on bed, squish sound, butt is wet. What the frick? I feel his mattress above from where I'm sitting, and it's wet. I stand up and I look at him sleeping in soaked sheets above me. Proceed to yell at him. Needless to say, I threw it in the shower and told him to get me a new one. Apparently, this isn't that uncommon, and the magic pee theory still holds up. My favorite roommate story is from freshman year. My roommate came home drunk one night and wandered into the dorm basement. She was too drunk to find a bathroom, so she peed in the dryer. Not the washing machine, the dryer. I'm half horrified and half impressed, given the fact that it was a front loader. And in an incredible twist of fate, the next day she forgot her clothes in the washing machine. Some kind gentleman paid to put them in the dryer for her, and it just so happened that it was the one she had peed in the night before. Sometimes I think karma isn't real, and then I read a story like this. Sharon used to eat in her room and then slide the plate under her bed. She'd do this every day until my roommate and I couldn't bear the stink anymore and needed plates for our own dinner. She also regularly invited her substance-dealing boyfriend over to hang out in our apartment during the day. Several times I came home to find deals taking place in our living room. Eventually, the cops were called by one of our neighbors and we, not him, were interrogated and searched. Oh, and there's the time she left a sanitary towel sunny side up on the toilet seat in our shared bathroom. She had some kind of fungal scalp condition that caused her hair to fall out in clumps, which we would frequently have to pull out of plug holes. She then announced she had scabies, and I decided to just lock myself in my room until she moved out. Bizarrely, according to Facebook, she seems to have grown up to become a normal, functioning adult. My first roommate. Oh, the memories. Very heavy, very socially awkward, and definitely psychotic. Often mumbled to himself with shifty eyes, ate my food, and was either railing against the evils of religion or trying to get me to join the Army of the Virgin or some other Catholic sect. He often lounged about in his tighty-whities and refused to clothe himself if I had a guest or girls over. He would just sit down and put a blanket over his lap. I walked in on him cranking it or blaring adult movies a number of times with which he used my tissues. He would also have long phone arguments with his girlfriend, who according to the wallet photo he had of her, was Greedily from Captain Planet. The kicker for me was when he had a breakdown and called the RA and a counselor to talk with him while I was writing a paper. He was highly agitated and at one point said,
I just looked over at my roommate while he was asleep and I thought to myself, I should just take a knife and kill him then myself. No offense, John.
I was in the zone with my paper, so I automatically replied, "None taken." Then did a double take as the horror dawned on me. Nonplussed eye contact with my RA. I noped the frick out and moved to a different floor. My roommate shaved his chest hair in the kitchen. He also had a super loud Asian girlfriend who screamed during the doing of the deed, even when we had people over. My freshman roommate installed a sliding bolt on the door to our shared room so that I couldn't enter while he was in bed with girls he brought in, which was so random I could never tell when he'd be using the room. The worst part was when I'd get back very late, wanting to get into the room and go to sleep, and he'd have me locked out in the hallway, especially when I had an early class. Even when I waited patiently in the hall, he refused to unlock the door, until one night I knocked harder and he threw a glass full of ice water in my face as he finally opened it. My roommate and his girlfriend's anniversary happened to be on Valentine's Day. On the morning of, I awoke to the smell of chocolate fondue and noticed him making chocolate-dipped strawberries. I commented on how nice he was for doing that, to which he replied, "Yeah, and if she's lucky she'll get my chocolate-dipped wang afterwards." Now, I thought he was joking, but later that night I heard a scream, not out of the ordinary if you know what their bedroom life was like, but that's another story, followed by the door slamming. I went on with my night and figured it was not a big deal. The next morning I saw him in our kitchen and he apologized for the scream. Me being naive, I asked what had happened. His actual response was, "I wanted to give her dessert, so I poured the fondue right onto my eggplant." He then had rushed to the hospital to get his burns treated. I could never look at him or chocolate fondue the same. Well, he had an idea and he committed to it. Gotta respect that. In other news, I'm not sure I'll ever be able to eat either cheese or chocolate fondue again in my life. My freshman roommate was an okay guy, but we didn't really have a ton in common. I think the housing department matched us up simply because we both liked ska music. The guy seemed kind of asexual. He had friends but never had guests, and I couldn't tell if he was gay or straight or what. Keep in mind that in those days, even in the most enlightened circles, some people tried to stay in the closet. Now, one of the things I regret most about college was drinking to excess, and I'd get blotto where I remembered very little about the nights before. One night I was way too hammered and I don't even remember how I got back to my room. But I woke up around 4 a.m. to the oddest dream, which was that while I passed out, my roommate came over to my bed, took off his pants and climbed on top of me. In the dream, I woke up while he was pulling down my pants and I rolled over and with one solid push, shoved him across the room where he crashed into his bed in his tighty-whities. I was a lot bigger and stronger than him and sent him flying. I can still see the image of him hitting his bed like it was yesterday. I went back to being passed out and later woke up remembering that weird dream. My roommate was gone, but later that day I saw him and he had a swollen lip. I'd like to give people the benefit of the doubt, so I'm not going to say for sure what happened, but a couple of weeks later, one of the guys next door asked me if I wanted to swap roommates and move into his room, and I said yes in a flash. This was 1986, by the way, in a very liberal and gay-friendly college. But even then, there was still a stigma about homosexuality. After we graduated, I heard several stories of people from college who eventually came out. I never cared, but some gay people were still nervous, and unfortunately, there were still some people who were homophobes. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I had a roommate that cranked it, constantly. I would open the door, which was an old-school push combination lock, so it took a few seconds, thank God, and enter. And he'd be shutting his monitor off with his hand over his pants. This seriously happened so much that I actually had to have a talk with him about it, after bringing girls over once in a while who would catch him in the act with me and suddenly no longer be in the mood. I don't have a problem with him having a bit of fun with himself, God knows I did it too, but I would catch him twice a week. If I gave you an honest guess, I'd say that he did it more than 5 times a day. Once he did it when I was just going downstairs to the dorm vending machine. I walked down and back up in like 3 minutes and he was hiding his shame already. Freshman year, I got bunked up with an extra roommate due to over-enrollment. A cramped dorm room with 3 guys in it. For a while, things were pretty fun and we were all friends. But after about 2 months, one roommate had a few disgusting habits. First, he instead of walking literally across the hallway to the bathroom, would pee in an empty or half-empty Gatorade bottle and just let them sit in the open. That was gross. But then he started crapping in takeout boxes and letting them sit all night or day until me and the other roommate got back to yell at him.
The third thing is he had a shoebox collection of used rubbers to be cranked into. The smell was so horrendous and awful, it took the RA and whoever else was in charge of housing a month to finally relocate me and the other guy and eventually kick the gross dude out. So for nearly an entire semester, at any time you could walk into our room and see crap in a container with leftovers still in it, a mosaic of different colored pee bottles, or a soggy shoebox on his desk filled with used rubbers. He never went to class and would play video games on his computer until 5 a.m. every day. I still think back on it nearly 10 years later, and I'm blown away with how long it took for any administrative intervention to happen. I mouthed, "What the actual frick" to myself so many times while reading that. How did you cope all that time? Spent some nights in the library or couch crashing at a friend's. Sometimes yelling at him enough would get him to clean up and at least keep his nasty box locked away. But after a couple of days, he would start filling his bottles and boxes again. The guy had no shame, no hygiene, and no respect for those around him. Horrible guy destined to live in a crappy basement apartment, bouncing from one minimum wage job to the next. My roommate once invited a girl that was kicked out of her house to stay with us. Keep in mind that our dorm room was barely larger than a prison cell. I listened to them do the deed on the bottom bunk more times than I care to remember. Your roommate definitely thinks you're the crappy roommate for not leaving when they wanted to do the deed. My roommate just gave me Chipotle money when he wanted to do the deed with his girlfriend. My first year, one of my roommates had his girlfriend over for the weekend. He asked me and my other roommate last minute to clear out for 30 minutes of football Sunday, so they could just get it on. This was like the fourth time he'd asked that weekend, with us agreeing each time, but whatever. He didn't get to see his girlfriend that often, so fair enough. I leave and came back 45 minutes later. She's still there, but they're just talking and the door was open. All clear, right? Around 10 minutes later, he asks me to give them a second and I tell him I'll be in the lounge and to text me when I'm good to come back. He didn't text me. I stayed there for over an hour waiting, but once a friend walked through, I asked him to check if they were still in our room. Nope. He had just left and never told me. Well, I wasted an hour not watching football. He brought this up in an argument months later, saying that I was a butt for walking in well after the time he'd asked me to stay out, and that he purposefully didn't text me because he was teed off. What the frick? How am I the butthole when I agreed to every single thing he asked? How am I supposed to know that door wide open and just sitting on the bed chatting is code for stay out? Now I'm angry about this all over again. I haven't seen him around the university in forever, so I hope he dropped out. One of my roommates was accused of attempting the unspeakable act on the other during a night of drunken escapades. I had a housemate, 4-person house by the way, who I asked to take care of my dog over one weekend. I never left any of the responsibilities associated with my dog up to anyone else because the rest of the guys were doing me a huge favor by letting me have him there in the first place. This one huge mate wasn't a huge fan of the dog, and when I came home after the weekend, there was crap and pee in my room where presumably my dog was kept most of the weekend. His food and water were in there too, so I guess that's something at least. He was really skittish when I went to say hi to him, so I think my housemate hit or kicked him while I was gone. I had a university flatmate who was a bit nuts. It started out with her just stealing my food. I couldn't leave anything in the kitchen for more than 12 hours or she'd have it. And then she would also put passive-aggressive notes up in our kitchen calling me a liar. I have food allergies, but apparently I was making them up. She was nasty to anyone I had over. She took all of my crockery and put it on top of the cupboards so I couldn't reach it, and I had to climb up and get it all down. She then convinced all of the guys in my flat to take the kitchen furniture and pile it outside my door so I couldn't get out of my room. I got the flu and she spent a day screaming at me through the wall while I alternately cried and slept until my parents came and drove me home. It got to the point where I was considering dropping out of university, but I asked to be put in another flat as a last resort. I got moved into a flat with 5 guys and it was so much messier, but so much nicer. Some people are suggesting that I did something to make her this crazy. I didn't do anything. That's why her behavior was just not understandable in any way. I had my own friends, I kept the kitchen tidy when I used it, I didn't make noise late at night, whatever. She was just looking for a punching bag. This is maybe the second video I've done on crazy flatmates, and I can reassure the author of this story that she is by no means alone in experiencing this kind of monster. They are out there. May the flying spaghetti monster help those who bring them into their homes. My second year of school, I went to an out-of-state school, and I had to get an apartment because there was no room in campus housing for transfer students. My school provided those of us with a list of other students in the same situation so that we might get together and go in on a place to live. So I ended up just doing that with my roommate. Things were great for like 2 years, and then he started going downhill. His grades were slipping, his girlfriend dumped him, and he didn't make the golf team. Poor guy. About this time, he also stopped contributing around the apartment, like cleaning dishes, taking out the trash, buying toilet paper, and other things. I finally decided to keep my own toilet paper stashed in my room in a locked cabinet. Days went by and no toilet paper showed up in the bathroom. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into a little over a month. One day my girlfriend was over, and she had to go to the bathroom. She finished up, washed her hands, and then went to dry her hands on the towel hanging over the toilet when I heard her freak out. The underside of the towel was covered in crap stains. My roommate had been wiping his butt with the towel above the toilet and hanging it back up. I have no idea how I could never smell it. I ended up throwing the towel on his bed and leaving him a roll of toilet paper with a note that said, "I think you need this more than I do." We never spoke again after that, and then our lease was up soon after and we parted ways. I just cannot even fathom being so depressed or whatever that I would rather wipe my butt with the same towel repeatedly than buy some frickin' toilet paper. My roommate was this geeky 400-pound guy who watched Sailor Moon in the original Japanese. He had a tiny red-headed girlfriend who regularly beat the crap out of him in daily life, and he let her. At like 6 p.m. on a Thursday, he suddenly asked me if I could vacate the dorm until 11, as they're going back to have some romantic time. I was a little teed off he gave me no warning, but I left anyway. Got back at midnight and walked into a scene of her in black vinyl gear with a riding crop and a taxi driver's hat, riding him, with him covered in welts from head to toe. I noped the heck right out of there. I had a roommate who was racist and obsessed with World War II Germany. I thought it was just in a History Channel kind of way at first. He then chose to read Mein Kampf for a class. Then he started writing juvenile bathroom graffiti in German in the stalls. He became upset when he found out I dated a black girl in high school. Then the swastika graffiti started showing up in the dorm elevator, along with the N-word drawn in a noose. He had a knife collection. He seriously came back after the first week with an end table, folding chair, and an easy chair, despite the fact that the room had no real extra space for any of it. He smelled and tried to get rid of the room smell with a whole can of peach renizit one day. He left food garbage in his trash, left for the weekend, and when I emptied it because it was smelling, he got mad at me for touching his stuff. He said he'd take care of me if I did it again. He said he hated kids. He was a special ed major. I asked why he'd majored in that if he hated kids, and he said, "There are 52 special ed majors in this school, and I'm one of only 2 guys." I moved out at the start of the next semester as soon as they'd let me. I paid the extra money for a single the next year. I've just looked him up, found a picture of him in black facial makeup and some creepy black and white photos. No, there's nothing wrong with reading Mein Kampf or having a knife collection or not liking kids in and of themselves. Context, people, context. Not a college roommate, but RAF trade training. My roommate came back paralytic drunk, having spewed in the sink in the block shower room until it was so full to the brim, only then to go on and have a nice long pee all over my TV and my shiny new Xbox 360. He was very apologetic the next day, as well as very hungover, which was hilarious to watch in Fizz and Inspection Parade, and he cleaned it all up, so I forgave him for the situation. What commonly accepted historical inaccuracies drive historians crazy? Albert Einstein didn't fail mathematics in school as is commonly believed. Upon being shown a column making this claim, Einstein said, "I never failed mathematics. Before I was 15, I'd mastered differential and integral calculus. Thanks a lot. Now I have no excuse for failing my pre-calc class." I mean, I think not being Einstein is a pretty good excuse. Poor Einstein, he had no excuses. I'm not a historian, just Mexican, and let me say that Cinco de Mayo is not Mexican Independence Day. I am a historian, and let me just say that it drives me mad when people think the Aztecs, actually the Mexica, thought that Cortez was a god. They were 100% clear on the fact that he wasn't. People like to vilify Dona Marina Malinche Malintzin, but she's pretty much proof that nobody thought Cortez was a god, since she actually gave the orders. People also love to think the Spanish showed up with 500 men and took over the capital of the biggest empire in the New World, but they conveniently forget the Tlaxicans have pretty bloody hands in that respect as well, especially considering the fact that they talked Cortez into making a quick detour to Cholula to fricking slaughter everyone. There's a very prevalent myth about a famous speech given by John F. Kennedy in Berlin. The story goes that his statement, "Ich bin ein Berliner," translates to "I am a jelly donut." While Berliner is a word for a type of jelly-filled pastry, no one at the time thought that's what Kennedy meant. The general story is that Kennedy should have said "Ich bin Berliner" rather than "Ich bin ein Berliner." People claim that adding the indefinite article ein is the problem. While ein does give nuance to the statement, it didn't make anyone at the time think Kennedy was talking about being a donut. Had he said "Ich bin Berliner," his statement would have conveyed a sense of him being a Berlin native, which obviously he was not. Ich bin ein Berliner, however, means something closer to "I am one with the people of Berlin," which is exactly what Kennedy wanted to say. No halfway intelligent German speaker at the time thought Kennedy was talking about food. In fact, the first time the alternate translation of the sentence is noted wasn't until 20 years later in 1983. I must admit that I bought this myth hook, line, and sinker. I blame Eddie Izzard, as likely to many people of my age or older. First, that Roman gladiatorial battles were bloodbaths with like 30 men dying in one fight. I read something very recently saying that 1 in 200 fights ended in killing. Gladiators are freaking expensive, and you don't just get them killed. I'm not saying that there are no accounts of large battles with many deaths. I'm saying that they were rare. When a man was injured, fight over. The second was that Nero played the fiddle and sang while Rome burned. He was in Antium and hurried back to Rome. My source is Tacitus. I used Tacitus since he's a primary source and a contemporary Roman historian. Firstly, a large amount of the information we have on this time period is skewed by the fact that the Christian Church produced and held a large amount of the records. And if you think that the Romans hated Nero, wait till you see what the Christians thought of him. Secondly, if you're really interested in learning more, the fine community at Reddit Ask Historians is full of the most knowledgeable and polite bunch of Redditors you'll have the pleasure of interacting with. Now, to expand on Nero, there are other accounts of him spearheading the relief efforts and housing refugees in what was left of the imperial palace. The Equites were really not fond of Nero, though, and since they were the ones that wrote the history books, we get a demonized image of Nero. I'm also glad that you pointed out the gladiatorial misconception. Gladiators were very well cared for by those that owned them. The misconception probably stems from the use of arenas as execution grounds for prisoners and the like. They would often be killed en masse, which could easily be mixed up with the gladiators being tossed in to die as the years went on. Those points aside, I'd like to address a couple of things. On Nero, he was one of the worst emperors of Rome. He was egotistical, violent, paranoid, and, this is important, very young. He openly scoffed at the Senate, which still attempted to act like it had power, but was referred to as a club for washed-up old men, and Nero did as he wished. He would belittle wealthy and influential men, seduce their wives, and generally act like the brutally violent, petulant child that he was. We cannot confirm or deny that he did in fact set fire to Rome, which was rumored, as it was said he wanted to build a massive palace and bath complex in the city center, and we can't confirm that he spearheaded the relief efforts and housed refugees, which is either a lie from his PR team, exaggerated truth, or actual truth. What we can confirm is the fact that Nero used the radical Christian cult, which is exactly what it was at this point in history, as the scapegoats for the disaster, resulting in severe persecution of the Christians at the hands of the Romans by order of Nero. The cult was outlawed for a time, and this was where the beginning of the rumors of Nero being the beast can typically be traced. As for gladiators, yes, they would fight lions. No, it wouldn't be often. Lions are expensive. Gladiators are more expensive. There are plenty of instances where large numbers of exotic animals were killed en masse, and even a few instances of gladiators. But the majority of the time, death was reserved for the dishonored gladiator, the unlucky gladiator, and, most commonly, those unfortunate enough to be sentenced to death in the arena. A nice, bloody practice target for a gladiator. I know more about the gladiator diet than their actual combat and interaction, however, so I won't really dive any further than I've already done. The ye in ye olde is actually abbreviated as an early modern English letter called thorn that was pronounced like th, so it's pronounced more like the oldie than anything else. Also, because Gutenberg's printing press didn't have thorn, so they improvised with y. That Paul Revere actually staged a midnight ride and was the only one who did so. He actually went from lodge to lodge warning people, then got his butt arrested. Then he escaped later on in the night. Paul Revere's Ride, written by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow in 1860, when Revere had been dead for 40 years. It's kind of a dramatization of the events of the night and plays up Revere and downplays the involvement of others like William Dawes. Possibly because the poem starts with, "Listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere." Dawes doesn't fit with the rhyme scheme. When Revere died, his obituary didn't even mention his ride. Longfellow was just lazy. Dawes would have been easy. It rhymes just as well as Revere. Hear the story of William Dawes, his midnight ride and noble cause. Boom! Did that in 20 seconds. That Marie Antoinette said, "Let them eat cake." Also, most of the misconceptions about her in general. She led a really sad life as a pawn in her mother's game, and a lot of the things that people assume about her come from a lack of understanding about the role of a Queen of France at the time and the French court. She personally preferred a less opulent lifestyle by court standards, but was seen as snubbing the court by trying to make changes to it. Her marriage wasn't very happy either, and later her own daughter didn't remember her very fondly because she generally tried to raise her kids to not be spoiled. She wasn't without her faults or mistakes, but by reading a lot of biographies about her, you start to understand how the image of Madame Deficit and the real woman don't match up. For anyone wondering about the origins of the quote came from a book and was attributed to a great princess. It was written in Rousseau's Confessions and was published when Marie Antoinette would have been just 9 years old and still living in Austria. That most of the slaves in the triangle trade ended up in the USA. Wrong. Just plain wrong. The majority of ships shipped from Africa ended up in South or Central America or the West Indies. Just to add to this, so many slaves were shipped to the West Indies because it was cheaper to work current slaves to death and just replace them rather than give them even a substandard quality of life. The same is true for the mass majority of slaves today, of which there are approximately 27 million. One thing that really bothered a professor I had was that when people discussed the leaders of Germany immediately prior to World War II, they frequently labeled them as psychopaths, insane, or crazy. This is especially true of their leader. When discussing him, people right off the bat label him as evil, a monster, an addict, had one ball, basically any reason to distance him from a normal person. You can't just dismiss what happened in Germany as craziness. There were rational people making decisions and running the country. My professor would call us out on it, and ever since then, I notice it a lot, and it irks me too. It's true. We can't just assume that removing the crazy people from government will get rid of this ever-looming threat that we still face today. There are very calculating people who will use others' fears and insecurities to gain power, no matter how many groups they have to kill to get there. The one that makes me mad was that the Titanic was in any way badly designed, badly built, or badly operated by the standards of the time. In fact, there are so many ridiculous inaccuracies surrounding the Titanic that it's hard to list even a fraction of them here. She was an incredibly seaworthy ship, much more so than any passenger ship around today. The iceberg tore a gash almost a third of the way down her side, and she still stayed afloat for more than 2 hours. In that time, all but 2 of her lifeboats were launched. There wasn't time to launch any more. She could have had 100 more lifeboats on board, and that wouldn't have helped without vastly more crew to operate them. Titanic's passengers genuinely believed that she was practically unsinkable. When the time came to begin loading the lifeboats, many passengers thought they would be safer staying on the Titanic. There wasn't time for the crew to wait around, so when the lifeboat was ready and there was no one else waiting to get in, it had to go. This is why so many of Titanic's lifeboats left only half full. Titanic wasn't traveling too fast for the conditions, by the standards of practice around at the time. Further precautions were put into practice after the incident, but no one on board can be blamed for doing what anyone on any ship would have done the same. She wasn't built using substandard materials. This rumor goes around a lot these days because of an article that was written some time ago. What the article is supposed to mean is that there was much better quality steel available today. This was not the case in 1909. Additionally, Titanic's builders were paid on a fee plus materials basis. They were given a set fee to construct the ship, plus the cost of all materials used. There was no incentive to use anything but the best steel they could get their hands on. The shipyard had an excellent reputation and would not risk tainting it by using bad steel, which could easily be noticed on inspection anyway. Titanic and her 2 sister ships, the Olympic and Britannic, were also surprisingly maneuverable for their size, much more so than expected. Some will tell you that Titanic's rudder was too small, but this simply isn't true. In fact, Olympic's wartime captain marveled at her maneuverability and was even able to throw her into a sudden turn, ramming and sinking a German U-boat. Olympic was the only merchant vessel throughout the First World War recorded to have sunk an enemy vessel.
You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe.
Galileo's models at the time of the controversy were less accurate than the geocentric models for predicting movements of celestial bodies, important for navigation. There was ample reason to be skeptical. The Catholic response was primarily because he decided to insult the Pope, his patron, not his scientific views. Church views on geocentric system were largely based on Greek models and not the scripture. Since his parody of the Pope was done within his works advocating heliocentrism, the Church requested he cease to publish them, but allowed him to publish about other scientific subjects. He agreed to do so. He later broke that promise, leading to the famous trials. It wasn't a war against science, it was politics. The myth that Napoleon was tiny. He was actually above average height. This mistake is due to the fact that the French inches were different from the English inches, I believe. And that there are paintings where he's depicted with French grenadiers, which usually were the biggest soldiers in the French army and all towered over him. Also, British propagandists were really good at the time, so they convinced everyone, including America to this day, that he was short. That people in the Middle Ages used spices to mask the flavor of meat that had gone bad. If you could afford spices that were traded from far-off lands at great expense, you could well afford fresh meat. Well, what about local spices? Cumin grew all over the Mediterranean and was used more often than black pepper, which is from India. The ancient Greeks kept cumin at the dining table in its own container, much as pepper is frequently kept today, and this practice continues in Morocco. Cumin was also heavily used in ancient Roman cuisine. The source is Wikipedia here, though. So isn't it plausible that poorer Indians used a variety of things to preserve meat and mask the flavor of lower quality stuff, while poorer Europeans used local cumin for the same purpose? Obviously, people enjoy spices anyway, but it doesn't seem outlandish that poor people would use whatever was local and cheap in greater quantities, whereas richer people would have access to the exotic stuff and use it for more variety. Although even wealthy Romans used spices far in excess compared to what our contemporary palates are used to, essentially masking what we think good meat should taste like. So maybe our entire concept of seasoning just doesn't translate to their time. But the fact is, there were definitely peasants who took their chances on varying grades of crappy meat, but also access to cheap local spices. I think people forget that there's a scale from stomachache to full-on 48-hour gut-wrenching, spew-inducing hell caused by food poisoning, and peasants would be hard-pressed to waste something that was only a little bit spoiled. A quick search also reveals that cumin and coriander are recommended by a lot of websites for treating very mild cases of food poisoning. Any beneficial properties of something so abundant and commonly used back then would have been known through folk recipes and such. The idea that Columbus was trying to prove that the Earth was round, or that anyone at the time period even believed that the Earth was flat. Columbus thought that the distance to India was much shorter than everyone else thought. That's why he went that way. Of course, everyone else was right and the distance was much greater, but America was in the way. This is what I was taught about the whole situation. Is there any truth to it? This is correct. Columbus believed that India was about 3 times closer than it actually is. Those who believed Columbus's voyage would fail did so because had he not run into the Americas, he and his crew would have starved long before ever reaching the Orient. Mark Twain didn't say, "The coldest winter I ever spent was a summer in San Francisco." I've seen quite a few quotes attributed to him that are really of unknown origin. I think because of his wide range of writings, it's easy to claim that he wrote something. The Vikings never wore horns on their helmets. The only reason we believe that is because of poems and tales of the Vikings saying they did so. We found remains of Vikings and non-horned helmets after the idea that they had horns on their helmet was popularized. Just think about it. Aren't horns on helmets a little impractical and inconvenient? You would never use them, and it would make a great handle for the enemy to drag your head to the floor. There are horned helmets at the National Museum of Denmark. Long before the Scandinavians started raiding, and therefore became what we think of as Vikings, their shamans might have worn horned helmets. These helmets predate not only the introduction of Christianity to Denmark, but also the Scandinavian take on the Roman pantheon, Odin, Frigg, Thor, and the others. Yeah, I think anyone who's done even the most general of history courses on Europe has been aware of this, but it's probably a good idea to shout it out to the listeners who don't know. That people who lived before modern medicine lived much shorter lives. When we say that the average life expectancy of an individual in, say, the year 1100 was 35, it doesn't mean that most people lived to around 35 and then suddenly died. It means that mainly due to high childhood mortality and death during childbirth rates, the average age of death was driven down. If you survived childhood and pregnancy, you had a fairly good chance to live well into your 60s or 70s. Of course, people died more often from diseases and malnutrition, but these were marginal factors in reducing the average life expectancy compared to childhood mortality and death during childbirth. Pocahontas and John Smith. Thanks to Disney, no one remembers that Pocahontas was a 12-year-old girl that was kidnapped by a 30-plus-year-old man, dragged from her home, and killed by a disease that she had no immunity to. That a katana is somehow the best sword humanity ever created, and that the samurai were the best swordsmen. Bullcrap! The katana is great, assuming you're fighting in Japan. As soon as you hit somewhere with metal armor, specifically Europe, that sword actually kinda sucks. Also, when you break down sword fighting among all the major sword cultures of Europe, Japan, China, some parts of India, 75% of it is the same crap, mostly with variances in footwork. Europeans could handle a sword just as well as the Japanese. The katana is celebrated because Japan and its samurai class celebrate it. The reality during actual wartime was that the sword was not nearly as important as other weapons, and the real warriors were prized on their skills with other weapons, like the bow or the naginata, which is a weapon not unlike a lance. Swords were like sidearms, and the other weapons were the mainstay. Once peacetime came and the samurai had nothing better to do with their time and money besides wax philosophical, they spent a lot of time glorifying and romanticizing the past. And that's where a lot of the veneration of the sword, bushido, and even the term samurai comes from. Exactly. Just like everyone else. Swords are great in duels. In actual battle, they're actually too difficult to maneuver with everyone crushing in around you. The exemption of the American-Philippine War from lower levels of history classes. I didn't even hear about it, much less learn about it until I took an AP class. Yeah, people really don't learn how crappy America has been sometimes. Yeah, George W. Bush offered the standard US high school explanation of the Spanish-American War during a visit to Manila once, and I facepalmed. The version where Spain totally had it coming because they blew up our one ship? Yeah, and we were greeted as great liberators by the Filipinos who graciously submitted to a half-century more of colonialism with no questions asked. Good old imperialism, the system where everybody wins. It's topics like this that fill me with information that tends to only be useful in making people not like me when I correct them. Knowing things makes me lonely. The common American myth that Jesse James was an American Robin Hood. Jesse James was a fiery rebel who killed unarmed and innocent people who posed no threat to him and robbed southern as well as northern banks and trains. Jesse's murderer is frequently referred to as the coward Robert Ford. While Ford did shoot him while facing his back, Jesse James once shot an innocent man named John Sheets who was merely filling out a bank slip. Jesse James never gave any money back to people who needed it or really had any chivalrous qualities other than deluding himself that he was a southern gentleman. The truth is that Jesse James was a domestic terrorist who stole and victimized dozens of people, killed innocents, and aggrandized himself by stealing the success of others. As someone from the UK, I think people forget about how crappy the country has acted over the centuries. We're obviously not the root of all evil, but people forget. We seem to celebrate the abolition of slavery and look at the US as the ones with slaves, when we'd been carting slaves around the world for a substantially longer time. Having a huge empire might have sounded quite cool and civilizing, but we were pretty awful in some cases, especially with how we treated the Aborigines. The Tories seem to want to bring back the pride in the history of the empire, but it's something we should have looked at more objectively. The same goes for Belgium. Leopold II killed a lot of people. He was responsible for the death of about 10 to 12 million Congolese people. Yet nobody really seems to remember. It just doesn't have the same impact, all because we haven't heard of it or we didn't watch enough documentaries about it. The relative scope of World War II on the Western Front versus the Eastern Front. People never understand or are even taught the sheer magnitude and difference. Americans are taught as if we were basically what won the war in Europe. It's pretty darn misleading. Fun fact, 80% of German combat power was used on the Eastern Front. In reality, D-Day, while significant, did not win the war in Europe. A few battles I would say are more significant would be Stalingrad and of course Kursk. People have no idea of the sheer size of the war on the Eastern Front, not to mention the brutality on both sides. You know it must suck when German troops consider fighting on the Western Front a break or vacation. that there were just 300 Spartans at Thermopylae. There was pretty much every other Greek city-state there at the time. Sparta fielded one of the smallest armies there and reluctantly went to war because they initially wanted to stay behind on their little peninsula. Even after the crap hit the fan and the rest of the Greeks retreated, there were still 700 Thespians and 400 Thebans as well as 300 Spartans that fought to the last. What really rustles my jimmies about it is that the Spartans couldn't be seen as retreating, they had to fight by the morals and laws that had been drummed into them. The Thebans and Thespians just stayed behind because they had gonads of steel, even though in those days they were more of a militia than trained soldiers like the Spartans, and they get zero recognition. Croissants are not French. Everyone, including the French, associates them with France, but really, the croissant is Austrian. After a baker in Vienna saw that the Turks were coming, the alarm was sounded just in time. When eventually the Turks were beaten back, the baker was allowed to make a celebratory pastry for the occasion. He created a crescent moon, since this was the Islamic and Turkish symbol. We skipped to Marie Antoinette. She loved the croissant and took the recipe with her to France. From then on, it became one of the most famous pastries of all time. What's the worst job you've ever had? I sprinkled mud onto potatoes that had already been washed, so they'd look freshly dug when they hit the supermarket. Most depressing holiday job I've ever had. There are some terrible jobs on here, but this is so brilliantly, horribly futile, incomprehensibly pointless. I spent a week working the business end of the MECSEP 2000, the actual name of the machine is repressed deep down inside me, which was a grinding horror that separated tiny scraps of chicken meat from splinters of bone. The chicken was delivered in frozen 10-kilogram blocks. Me and 3 or 4 other chosen ones had the task of breaking up the gore block with a chisel and feeding it into the mechanical maw. One day, one of our blocks consisted entirely of wishbones. Thousands of them. I've had terrible jobs, but nothing compares to this guy that called into a radio contest for worst job titles, as his was Chicken Butthole Remover. He stood on the slaughter line and made sure the carcasses were butthole free. If they weren't, it was his job to fix it. Tell us why you won this job. Well, I've always been passionate about not eating chicken buttholes, so I figured I could do some good in the world. Just making sure one family doesn't accidentally consume chicken poo strainer is enough for me. Dancing bear. I was a waiter at a kids' restaurant which had a bear as its mascot. The new guy had to be the bear on their first day, which meant putting on a massive bear costume over our waiter's uniform, including a huge fur head that you could barely see out of. You were then led around the place to wave at the parents and play with the kids once per hour. If you spoke, you were fired, as some of these kids were return customers who would recognize the waiter's voice. Wanting to impress my boss, I really hammed it up. I danced, I gestured, I goofed around, I sat on a mother's lap. I ruffled a father's hair while he growled, "Get off me or I'll stab you." The boss loved it so much that he made me be the bear every day that I worked there. Which would be great, except that it was August and so hot that the restaurant's aircon broke. The bear suit hadn't been washed in the history of the restaurant, so served as a memorial to the sweat of 100 fallen waiters. Little kids would run headfirst at the bear and headbutt my family jewels with depressing regularity, and all it earned me was the disgust of my wait team who thought I was goofing off work by being the bear, since it was clearly easier than carrying 2 plates of reheated lasagna across the room and refilling drinks. As many other commenters noted, I was relieved when this person clarified that the job in question was someone in a bear costume and not a live bear in a children's restaurant. Admittedly, the bear's job in that theoretical situation wouldn't be great either. Cutting fancy glass for use in mosaics. A glass cutter is basically a pen with a small metal wheel at one end and a metal ball on the other. Fancy glass is thick, heavy, expensive, and sharp. The weight, thickness, and texture changes drastically. One might be a 3 cm smooth green glass sheet, and the next might be a textured 5 cm piece of orange. There is no training, and glass dust is a thing. My fingertips were swollen with tiny shards of glass, and I broke much more glass than I was worth. It was a short gig. I just can't fathom why someone would do a task like that without at least considering wearing some kind of protective glove. Kinda reminds me of a task I used to do when I worked in some labs. We used an oxyhydrogen torch on a stand to cut or seal quartz vials. They came as a straw, and you'd cut it in half, closing each half on one end when forming the cut. Then we'd fill them with organic sample material, often powdered hair or toenails, and then use the torch and a weak vacuum to seal the open end with the sample inside. That way, the mass of the sample is permanently stored and can be irradiated and analyzed over and over. Anyway, this task essentially meant that you had to be holding this tiny little vial about the diameter of a drinking straw in a torch flame hot enough to melt fricking quartz, above 1600 degrees, in a matter of 2 seconds or so, and your bare fingers were about 2 inches from the flame. There was no way you'd have the dexterity to do it with leather gloves on, and anything else would be at risk of melting into your flesh if you accidentally got burned. That was a rather unnerving task. My worst was probably for a moving company. Everyone dreads moving day, and for me, that was every day. I liked it. New houses with new challenges and new people to charm out of tip money every day. I also got a nice workout. It was the illiterate morons I had to work with and scamming bosses that got me out of it. Hotel housekeeping. If it comes out of the human body, I've cleaned it up. I started in a by-the-hour motel when I was 14, owned by a woman who didn't bother with hazardous waste procedure and cleaned up what looked like a murder scene with nothing but bleach and kitchen gloves. I walked into that room and was absolutely positive that when I pulled back the shower curtain, there was going to be a body in the bathtub. Thankfully, there wasn't, just blood everywhere. The owner refused to let me call the police and just made me clean it, and I didn't want to get in crap for bleaching a murder scene at 14, so I never did call the cops. That hotel owner definitely killed someone and made you clean it up. Picking mangoes in Australia. Many people are unaware that if you snap the stalk on a mango, poisonous sap flies out, which makes you blister quite dramatically. Also the best job because of the beautiful scenery. Australia, where even the fruit can kill ya. I worked at a slaughterhouse for a little while. They killed steers there but got pork shipped in. The hams came in a giant cardboard vat, probably 5 feet wide and 4 feet deep. They were heavily waxed on the inside to make them waterproof and had steel banding running around the outside, kind of like an old keg or barrel. Once we fished out most of the hams and trimmed them, there was always a couple of feet of blood at the bottom. As the new guy, it was my job to dangle over the edge with a meat hook in one hand, fishing out the remaining hams and scraps. Usually, it was about an hour in shoulder-deep blood with your face next to the surface. I worked in an office, entry-level job after a career switch. My boss was a crazy woman, never happy, never satisfied, always changing her mind and blaming everyone else. One day she called me into her office and she gave me 2 projects, and got mad when I asked her questions about how she wanted them. At the end of the meeting, I asked her, "Which of these 2 do you need first?" Her answer, "Both." I thought she had misunderstood my question, so I repeated, "But which of them do you need first?" "Both." "No, really, which of these 2 do you need first?" Her answer at this point was yelling, "Both, both, 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 both." A few months later, I had enough of her crap and I went to HR to complain about her treatment of the staff. Of course, she had a friend in the HR department and she got wind of it. And she called me in her office and she complained about me complaining about her, and she told me, "You don't complain here, you leave." That was my clue. I called my headhunter and found myself a new, better job with better pay. A few years later, I'd built my career and I was actually ahead of her in responsibility and position. I met her at a conference and she was giving false praise how I was one of the best workers she'd ever had, and then rhetorically asked me why I left, in front of other people. I told her that I had to thank her for my career since she was the one who suggested I leave by telling me, "You don't complain here, you leave." She really didn't like that one. A lovely bit of vicarious justice for those of us who've ever had a crappy and insincere manager in their lives. Revenge like this is very sweet indeed. Door-to-door solar panel salesman for a corrupt home energy company. Nothing better than knocking on someone's front door right in the middle of a Patriots game. I did door-to-door home renovations, windows, doors, sliding, etc. right after the 2008 market crash. I can't tell you how many people told me they weren't going to be able to make their next mortgage payment, let alone spend $20,000 on new windows. Soul-crushing. Crash or no crash, it's still pretty hard even now when the economy is not so bad and people still can't afford $20,000 on new windows. Internship at a public relations firm in college. I was promised agency experience, writing opportunities, and valuable experience. Turns out what they actually meant was sitting in a room for 8 hours cold calling CEOs from an outdated call list and trying to trick them into a sales presentation. Might I add, about a month into the job they hired a new intern manager who was the epitome of Massachusetts trash. Drove to work every day from the Cape on his Harley, it was 2 hours one way, and lauded his degree from Bunker Hill Community College. He chain-smoked and DJ'd on the side at trash North Shore nightclubs. He insisted on sitting in the room with us for 8 hours to check if we were actually making calls, all while berating us for being poor employees and cheap labor. On my last day of the internship, he called me into his office and told me, "The only reason you're still here is because we didn't have to pay you. You'll never be successful like me. You're not cut out for the business world. If I were you, I'd drop out and try to find a trade you'll succeed in." Even as a 19-year-old, I knew an idiot when I saw one. I looked him square in the eye and said, "You can go F yourself," and walked out with the other interns. He then wrote a letter of complaint to my school to try and have my internship credit revoked. But luckily my advisor knew the situation and cut him out. Dan the DJ, if you're reading this, I want you to know I took your advice and did my best to never become you. Being poor means being willing to do effed up things for tiny bits of money, so I've had more sucky jobs than I can count. But the one that stands out the most is door-to-door political fundraising and canvassing. This was back in the early 90s. The way it worked was that you had a clipboard, a pen, petition, and some envelopes. The whole crew would meet at the office and then pile into the 15-passenger vans. The supervisor would drive us out to a territory, or turf, anywhere from 10 minutes to 2 hours away from the office. Then they would divide us into pairs and give each pair of canvassers a map marked with the pair's assigned turf. If I recall correctly, we started knocking on doors around 3 or 4 p.m. and kept it up until 8 p.m. In that time, we were supposed to knock on people's doors and talk to them about whatever issue we were working on at that point. When I did my brief stint, it was nursing home reform legislation. Then we were supposed to get the occupant to sign our petition and make a contribution, preferably a check or charge on the spot. Our nightly quota was $120 per person. If you think that people hate having telemarketers call their houses at dinner time to ask them for money, just imagine how much they love it when those same telemarketers show up unannounced on their front doorsteps. Between crappy weather, vicious dogs, smackheads and tweakers answering the door, people's pervasive hatred of trespassers and solicitors, and constant fear of being fired for missing my quota, field canvassing was definitely one of the worst jobs I've ever had.
You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe.
I worked at a used car lot for about a month my first summer home from college. Pay was decent and under the table. The summer of 2001, I was getting paid $15 an hour, which was awesome for a college kid looking to save up for beer money in the fall. I was the lot boy and prepped the cars that were sold, charged up the batteries on the ones that had been sitting for a while, and picked up lunch for the sales team. Overall, it wasn't bad, but the work was tedious in the sun, and the people that I worked with were odd. Sales guy 1. When he wasn't selling used cars, he was a bouncer or door guy at a third-rate adult club. He would borrow our high-end SUVs to drive escorts on the weekends. Without the boss knowing, he would have me put dealer plates on them after the owner left on Saturday afternoons. Sales guy 2. This was a peak rap or rock era, and he dressed and acted like a Fred Durst clone. Bragged about how he had multiple girlfriends and would make them bring him food at alternating times. One afternoon, the lunch schedule got crossed and we had an amazing, trashy girl fight in the parking lot. The office manager was the former girlfriend of Sales Guy 1 and Sales Guy 2, who retired from dancing at the club to go straight. She still escorted on the weekends, though, processed finance applications and did the cash drops at the bank. The owner. He paid everything in cash and specialized in selling cars for just below $10,000. Every Friday, we had a customer who would come in and co-sign on a crappy Nissan Altima with $80K on it and would pay in cash. Always from New York or North Jersey. I just assumed they were engaging in substance dealing or human trafficking. Our mechanic was a quiet guy. He kept to himself and would listen to classic rock all day. After about a week, he told me he was happy for the job as he had been away for a while. He was good about showing me how to work on engines, and we would hang out in the garage drinking Miller High Life out of paper cups. The guy loved Steely Dan. After about a month, I noped right out of there. While the pay was good, the ongoing drama of the people I worked with wasn't enough to hang around. Sales guy 2 had just gotten arrested on the lot for failing to pay child support, and I knew I was just a few days away of being guilty by association or something. I was a furnace helper in a steel factory. We made bumper mounts and hinges for truck hoods and other heavy steel parts. I unloaded red-hot metal parts from the furnace with a pair of tongs. I used to catch fire 2 or 3 times a day. I hated that. Never have I seen someone so casually drop the fact that they regularly immolated themselves as part of their work. That's not far off referencing that they only had to ward off a few axe-wielding psychopaths from time to time in my book. dealer in a casino. You learn a lot about different games and get to play cards all shift. You also make some pretty good coin with tips and whatnot. However, you get to meet some of the worst people on the planet. When people start losing money at your table, several hundred to several thousand at a time, suddenly that fun atmosphere becomes soul-suckingly tense, to the point of, you better hope you're not walking alone when you're off tonight. But you get to call your pit boss over and say, this patron just threatened me, and boom, booted out of the casino, banned for 6 months to a year, and possibility of criminal charges. Sometimes I got a nice justice semi working there. Anyone who's thinking of being a dealer, it's definitely not for everyone. If you ever wanted to work wonders for your confidence and have the ability to become a stone when it comes to people being absolute crapheads to you, I suggest it. I think back to what skills I've gained from my time dealing. I've learned to be grateful, and when I have a crap day, I remind myself that I'm not dealing anymore. When people get sarcastic or angry or crappy towards me, it doesn't bother me anymore because I've dealt, no pun intended, with the worst. If you're a student and can handle taking a lot of crap, or want to learn how to handle taking a lot of crap, try being a dealer. You make great money at the cost of your social life. You generally work nights and all through the weekends. One of the things I didn't really mention, but it's implied, when people are giving you crap at your table, you have to stand there and take it. You don't have the option to walk away. Hopefully, your pit bosses are good enough to have your back. I'm a dealer at a smaller casino, and it's the most soul-sucking job I've ever done. You see the worst in everyone, because, let's be honest, no one is ever a winner in the long-run gambling. At least your pit bosses actually throw people out for threatening dealers. Ours walk the other way or act like they don't hear the guy screaming and calling the female dealer a working girl or the C word. I collected baby batter from chickens for artificial insemination. You have to, help get them off. Not my job. I just walk into the room and the frickers immediately begin to expel the white gold. We then have to rush them and get the collection vial in place quickly or the day's worth of product was lost. So much stuff on my gloves. Ugh. Worked for the UMG straight out of high school processing CD orders. It was still a thing back then. I was 17 and the only guy in the office, working with nothing but 40-plus-year-old women. Sweet Christ, the raunchiest conversations that led to me discovering the definition of TMI. The work was fine, just data entry, and they had a massive backlog when I arrived. In the first week, I cleared it all out, and no one in the office had anything to do, including myself. I couldn't browse the web. I brought a book into the office and was reading it, and got yelled at by my supervisor for it. I explained that I had nothing to do, and sitting around staring at nothing for 8 hours a day was torture. What about our backlog? It's gone. That can't be true. Well, go and check for yourself. They came back. Well, okay, if you have nothing to do, come and talk to me. After a week of coming to them every hour on the hour asking for something to do, and them saying they had nothing, they yelled at me again for bugging them. They eventually fired me for refusing to come in 10 minutes prior to my scheduled time unpaid, and logging into the phones. There was nothing going on, and I sure as crap wasn't going to sit around doing nothing for one more minute than I had to, much less unpaid. A close second was many years later, I was brought in to package software for a company that had bought another company. Get it up to their standards, make sure it's installed silently, etc. They didn't have a place for me to sit, so they put me in an unheated warehouse. In the winter. With massive bay doors that opened up 4 to 6 times a day for deliveries. After working there for a month, I still didn't even have a computer to work on. At the end of that month, I got a computer, but there was nothing for me to do still. It took me a week to track down my manager after this point, and he said that they wouldn't have work for me for a few more months. Aren't you lucky? You get to do nothing and collect a paycheck, he said to me. Yeah, real lucky. Then they brought on another guy for some reason to do the same job. We were both incredibly confused, to say the least. After another month and having to read about 24 books, I just stopped showing up, submitted my time and checked my email every day to see if there was any work to do, as well as sending weekly emails asking if there were any tasks coming my way soon to my manager. Finally, after 2 months, they caught on and let me go. I didn't feel bad about it in the slightest. I can't believe roofing isn't on here. That is the absolute freaking worst. Pretty much like being a human egg on a griddle all day with a side order of heaving shingles around and trying not to fall and break your neck. I was a cashew flicker at a candy factory. Literally, I flicked the bad cashews off a conveyor belt. Managed a local restaurant, worked 10 to 12-hour days, often with closing and leaving at 1 a.m., only to be back to open at 8 a.m. 6 days a week with an 8 a.m. meeting on my only one full day off. Pyramid scheme selling Kirby vacuums for in-house demonstrations. I got out of that within a couple of weeks. I got offered a job doing this. I went to the interview and he said I'd earn around £2,200 a month, which sounded amazing, but I thought it was a bit too good to be true and didn't take it in the end. I didn't realize it was a pyramid scheme, though. A unanimous recurring factor on all the many terrible job, quitting, and interview stories that I've done for this channel has been how prevalent these schemes are at sneaking into the serious job market. You've been warned, folks. I took a job with a marketing company working at the mall trying to get people to take surveys. Literally hundreds of people walking right by you, refusing to make eye contact. It's like being a ghost. Horrible job, hated every second of it. I quit after 6 hours. Lifeguard. It was hours upon hours of boredom intermingled with seconds of sheer terror. Glorified cleaners. Spent most of my time cleaning changing rooms and toilets with a bit of time on poolside doing jack all. In 4 years, there was one rescue when I was on shift, and I was mopping the floor in reception. Lifeguard is the best job I've had. For one, our rules were probably a bit different, but I worked at a beach, and by our rules, we could only sit for half an hour at a time. So in an 8-hour day, we only worked a max of 4 hours. The other 4, we would read a book or something. Also, as a lifeguard, you could check out hot women and not be seen as a creep. I didn't actually take the job, but it would have been the worst by far. I applied for a position in an industrial bakery as a sanitation technician. As advertised, the job would entail disassembling, cleaning, and reassembling equipment. But when I showed up for my interview, really an informal orientation, the nice lady told me I would actually be standing at one end of a conveyor belt and given one simple task: to pick up trays of bread coming off the conveyor belt, rotate them 90 degrees, and place them on a different belt, for the entire duration of my 12-hour overnight shift. It would have nearly doubled my pay, but I just couldn't do it. I put my little hat back on and went back to rolling burritos. Even in the darkest, most horrible, open-to-close days of my time at the burrito restaurant, I would console myself with the thought of that job and how much worse things could be. What's the biggest bullet you've ever dodged? Grandma got a flat tire, pulled over. As she was on the side fixing the tire, her car was hit and totaled. Right from her hands. She was actually okay. I used to roller skate as a kid outside my house down a hill and never wore any kind of protection. Suddenly, one day before I go out, my older brother tells me I can't leave unless I put on a helmet, which is weird since he's never cared before. Anyway, I do it, and that day, for the first time ever, I fell and landed on the back of my head so hard that the helmet cracked. That crack would have probably been my skull had I not worn it. Years ago, I was on a first meet for an internet date. We met at a bar and the bartender carded us. Even though we were both older, they were doing stings in the area, so he was carding every single person. Handed mine right over, but my date was a jerk about it. The bartender checked mine and handed it back to me. He checked his, and rather than handing it back to him, he placed it on the bar right in front of me. It had the stamp of an unspeakable act offender on it. The guy picked it up, looked at the bartender, looked at me, and then got up and walked out. I immediately Googled him. He was on the registry and had been in prison for the unspeakable act before. Lesson learned, always Google people. The bartender and I are still friends. I sold my bar and grill business in August 2019. I sold my 3 restaurants in February 2020 for way more than they were worth. Now 2 have closed post-COVID. This one just materialized yesterday, actually. About a year ago at my job, I was offered to switch from my current team, where I was established for a few years and had seniority, for a new department that had just started to kick off, write processes, basically start from square one. A lot more work for the same amount of pay. I figured, screw it, and went. Yesterday they announced that they just closed the physical HQ office for my old department, and everyone in that part of the company would have to either move to one of 14 random states that we can't pick, it's basically chosen by roulette wheel for where you're going, to a local office, or they're going to be fired on June 22. Thankfully, since I'm part of my new department, I wasn't included in that mandate. Phew. I was a teen driver not paying attention at an intersection at the crest of a hill with low visibility when the light turned green. The car behind me honked, and just as I was about to go, a truck barreled through the red light on the perpendicular road at decidedly ludicrous speed. If I'd been paying attention and gone when the light turned green, I very likely would have been T-boned to death. Closest call I've ever had. I would wager that if I were in the driver's seat, even though I would have survived, my undies, trousers, and the seat itself would have been decidedly rendered unusable once I'd realized what had happened. I was working in an amusement park during college. I used to come home on a Friday afternoon and usually pick up a Friday shift as well as a full weekend, during the month that the park was only open on weekends. I was a manager at my attraction. One particular Friday, I got home and was too exhausted to do a Friday shift, so I bagged it and decided to just work the Saturday and Sunday and be back at school on Monday. I got a call from a good friend and co-worker telling me that our attraction was in flames, there were casualties, and a couple of my friends and co-workers were missing. 7 people lost their lives. My co-worker, assistant manager, went back in and pulled people out to safety. He was okay. I was in shock for a few days. Had I done what I usually do, I would have been there in charge and I know I would have gone in to help. It could have been an entirely different situation. So yeah, I dodged a bullet, but a devastating event happened. I'll never know. To keep very true to the topic, I was out kayaking on a lake and several bullets whizzed by me. There was a distinct buzz, crack, buzz as it went by. I think some people were just out plinking in their backyard adjacent to the lake and didn't think a backstop was necessary. This also happened to me a few weeks later when I was paddling on a small stream. Bullets whizzed by above the bank, just over my head. I don't think anyone knew I was there at the time. Regardless, when you go out and shoot stuff, make sure there's a backstop for frick's sake. Also, I don't know how big the bullets were, so I'm unsure which was the biggest bullet I dodged. When I was 16, I used a fake ID to go out clubbing. The legal age in Ireland is 18, so I passed for it and did it all the time. One night I felt sick and decided to leave my friends and go home. I knew there was a taxi rank in a small alley somewhere and was looking for it when an older guy, 20s probably, offered to show me. The alley he brought me down was not the taxi rank. Once I realized, I tried to go back but he pushed me against a wall and told me I wasn't going anywhere. I just remember not being able to scream. I just froze. It felt like forever, but probably only a few seconds later, some guys I went to school with just happened to walk down by the alley, also looking for taxis, and saw me. One of them yelled out my name, and then he realized the guy had his arm across the throat, and he went mental. The guy jumped the wall at the end of the alley, and I just burst into tears. My schoolmate took me home and made sure I was okay. I'm in my mid-30s now with 3 daughters, and I still shudder when I think about this. Driving to Phoenix from Utah for a job in January of 1989. My new boss told me if I wasn't there by 8 a.m. Monday morning, he'd give the job to someone else. It was 8 p.m. on Sunday evening when he told me that. By the time I got to Flagstaff, I was delirious and hallucinating. I hadn't slept in 2 days, I'd been partying. I pulled over for a nap at a rest area. So cold. I started the truck just to heat it up a little bit. The next thing I remember, I was lying in the bed of my truck, with a guy gently slapping my face. Some trucker watched me start the truck, 79 Ford, and slump over to sleep. He said he was worried because he could hear the exhaust leak as I sat there idling. Made a mental note of the time. An hour later, he checked on me and I was unconscious. So after pounding on the windows for a few minutes, he noticed the sliding window latch was busted, just like the one in his own 79 Ford. He pulled me out through the back window and saved me from carbon monoxide poisoning. Took me a week to shake off that headache. No, I didn't get the job. I didn't roll up to the job site until just before noon. The big boss wasn't cool about it. On a brightish note, one of the guys on another crew saw me begging for the job and thought I had moxie. He hired me for a dirtier, crappier job that I grew to loathe. But at least it wasn't a wasted trip and I didn't die. I matched with a guy on Tinder who played for the Atlanta Falcons. He was really charming and seemed nice. He asked me to fly down to Atlantic City for Memorial Day weekend, said he'd pay for everything, airfare, hotel, food, etc. But I'd never met him before and he refused to give me his phone number. I was uncomfortable flying to meet a stranger, so I told him no. 2 weeks later, he was on the news for kicking and killing his girlfriend's dog. What's with the Atlanta Falcons and dogs? I'm not even trying to be funny, like that's really messed up. I took my wife to an indoor shooting range in 2014. I'd been at this range many times and safety was always their top priority. They made you sit through a safety video, take a quiz, and get a temporary certification before they allowed you into the range. The place got really busy and their safety policy became less stringent as time went on. I noticed that the lane next to us that time had 3 people in it, already a violation of rules. 2 big guys and 1 tiny woman, probably in her 20s. They were handing her various firearms and laughing when she couldn't handle the recoil. Big violation there and incredibly irresponsible. This girl was muzzle sweeping everyone. Another huge violation. I got a bad feeling and told my wife to pack it up because we were leaving. As soon as we started walking away, bang! That girl had fired a round right where my wife was standing just a few seconds prior. I told the range officers that they needed to get in there and do something about those idiots and that we weren't coming back. I've only been to a range a few times since that happened, and now I don't even go at all. Too many idiots. From the one range I used to frequent in my life, I can tell you that at the very first muzzle sweep you would be out and with a temporary ban, at the very least. Crazy stuff. I was out at the bar with my friends and feeling tired. When I said I was leaving to turn in early, they all good-naturedly gave me crap. That night they all got $1,500 tickets for public urination on their walk home from the bar. Not exactly life-changing, but not a small bullet either. 2005, my friend and I evacuated New Orleans 2 days before Hurricane Katrina and drove to Mississippi with the little money we had. We were trying to decide where to stay for the night, and it was between a mid-range hotel or a really cheap motel. Decided to spend a little more for the hotel. During the night, the eye of the storm came through Mississippi and flattened the roof of the motel that we'd decided against. My mom wasn't going to leave for Katrina. I told her I was going to take me and my little sister and hitchhike if she didn't pack the car and leave within the hour. My dad didn't leave, and he ended up on the roof with our neighbor because our house got flooded. No way all of us would have survived. Katrina decimated my town. Everything 2 miles inland or less was destroyed. I was booked on Pan Am Flight 103, which went down over Lockerbie, Scotland. I didn't have a premonition or anything supernatural, I just decided to cancel my seat. Didn't think anything of it until the plane went down and my mother had written down my flight plan and reminded me. This was back in the day when you could cancel without a penalty up to a couple of days in advance. On any given day, we make decisions for no concrete reason, really. I just chose not to go that day, and we come to learn it was a good decision. I try not to evaluate my decision because I don't want to affect my future decisions by second-guessing or trying to work the odds. This is only one example of times that I've dodged a significant bullet. I stopped duck hunting with a guy because he would put his 12-gauge Remington 1100 on his shoulders with no thought to where the barrel was pointing. I'd tell him to point it the other way or I'd stop and move to the other side. But he'd shifted it around and it would end up pointing at my head when we were walking. I told him I wouldn't hunt with him anymore and he was really teed off at me and called me a fricking Nancy, and that there was no danger because the safety was on. A couple of weeks later, he told me he'd had an accidental discharge with the gun on his shoulder.
You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe.
I was subletting an apartment in college and got zapped by the electric stove. Gave notice immediately and moved out with very clear reasons why I was moving out. That building burnt a few weeks later. A Dutch mate of mine living in Tasmania had to visit his sick mum in Amsterdam. Booking his flight home online, he said to his wife, "You know, I'm sick of flying Malaysian Airlines. The food is crap, the hosties are miserable, it'll cost more, but I'm booking with Singapore Airlines." So instead of dying on MH17, he was on a plane 40 k's ahead of it. I got chucked off a horse. I hit the ground so hard I felt my soul leave my body. Started to cough up blood and was having trouble breathing within 30 seconds. Rushed to the hospital and the doctors were running down the hallway with me on a backboard. Doctors running is always a bad sign. I was sure I was dying. Came to find out that I broke 2 bones in my back and collapsed a lung. Once I was more with it, a nurse handed me my helmet and said, "It's a good job you were wearing this." It had been cracked almost in half. If I hadn't been wearing that, it would have been my head, and I most certainly would be dead or permanently disabled. Wear your helmet, kids. A bus. I grew up in Bermuda, and since it's such a small island, cars are limited to 1 per family, and everyone drives mopeds. I was driving into town and came up to a red light behind a bus. As is tradition, I scooted around the bus to be in front of the line of traffic. Literally 2 seconds later, a second bus smashed into the back of the first bus at like 30 miles per hour. I would have been pancaked. Without question, 100% dead. I just sat on the side of the road for a bit and thought about my mortality. My only other Bermuda bus-based encounter was driving home from my first job in the rain. An oncoming bus in the opposite lane went through a massive puddle and sent what looked like a tidal wave of water right at me. It literally picked me and my little Yamaha V50 right up and swept us off the road into some grass. So I guess in the end it was me won, buses won.
I attempted to self-delete.
I ended up passing out in some bushes near the train station. Early the next morning, a girl I went to high school with, who I barely knew, saw me while she was boarding the train for a college interview early in the morning. She recognized me and told the conductor. He dismissed me as a junkie who just needed to sleep it off. She said, "I know him. He doesn't do substances or drink. Call 911 now." 3 days in a coma. I'm very grateful now. About 6 months after I left my ex, he got caught sending very inappropriate content to a 12-year-old. He was 34 at the time. I really needed a job, and the manager at my dispensary in my area offered me a spot. I said no, and 4 days later they were raided and everyone got arrested. I'm confused. Did they not have a license, or are the feds just raiding dispensaries because it's technically still illegal by federal law? Yes, the latter exactly. The narrator is very confused about this later one. You can have a licensed, commonplace sort of store that is in actual fact illegal under the laws of the country you live in. Very strange. My ex-girlfriend moved out of my house a day before the first lockdown in Spain. She had previously pulled a knife on me. I had 2 job offers in different states at the same time. The one I didn't take was offering more money, but I just didn't gel with the guy who'd be my boss and really liked the guy who would be my boss at the lower offer. The better offer was in a state I'd always wanted to live in for a company I admired, but something felt off, so I went with the lower offer. I ended up meeting my wife in the city of the lower offer. Meanwhile, the company that had given me the higher offer abruptly closed and laid off their entire staff with no severance. So if I'd taken that, I would have been stuck on the other side of the country with no job and no money. I got on an intercity bus and almost sat in the middle, but then moved and sat at the back. The bus later collided with a truck and opened up like a tin can. If I'd sat where I originally intended, I would have been killed. Was driving on a freeway in the right lane when there was a sudden traffic jam ahead. I slammed on my brakes and was about to swerve onto the shoulder when I noticed that I wasn't sure the semi behind me could stop, and I didn't know how long we actually had a shoulder, construction was happening at the time, made the decision to rear-end the car in front of me to stay off the shoulder. The truck went onto the shoulder, brakes squealing, and finally managed to stop when the back tires of their trailer were level with me. Good thing we weren't in a center lane and that we happened to have a shoulder at that moment. As a bonus, I stopped in time and didn't hit the car in front of me after all, though I would have happily taken that hit and hopefully only would have shook up the people in front of me, in place of literally being hit by a truck. I once convinced 2 police officers that I was the one on my fake ID. It was my older brother's ID 22. I was 19 at the time. Me and my roommate were checking out the liquor store and the cashier said my roommate's ID was fake. It was an actual fake with his photo, so the cashier quickly told the other very large worker to lock and barricade the door immediately. They called the cops and practically held us hostage until the cops arrived. My roommate ended up getting a ticket for his literal fake ID, and I convinced the cops I was my brother. We look like brothers, but we definitely don't look like the same person. What sold them was when one of the 2 cops asked me to name some streets. We were in our college town about 2 hours away from where my home address was. I recited the address on the ID because it was my childhood home, and the cop said, "No, name some streets around this address." He apparently grew up and went to high school in that district, so he was testing me. I named like 5 or 10 road names in that area, and I was good to go. I have no idea how I didn't panic or act flustered. I'd been pulled over for going like 9 miles an hour over the speed limit before, and I'd been freaking out that time. But this day, I had ice in my veins for some reason. A few months ago, I was driving on the I-80 at night when out of nowhere, the biggest buck I'd ever seen was in the middle of my lane. I did exactly what you're not supposed to do and swerved, and thankfully managed to keep the rear of my car content with it. I literally shaved that buck's butt. My mirror was folded in. I know you're not supposed to swerve, but I drive a tiny little thing and that buck's body would have gone through my windshield and into mine and my wife's face at 70 miles per hour. My friend and I were in a bar and she was talking to a guy she met on Tinder. When she turned around, I saw him put something into her beer. I walked up, pretended to stumble, and knocked it out of her hand and apologized. Told her I'd buy her next beer, and when we walked over to the bar, I told her what he did. We left right after. Decided to grab a case of beer and play Mario Kart that night instead. I only tagged along because she asked me to, which I'm always perfectly happy to do. Glad that I did. My first ever boyfriend dated me when I was 14 and he was 16. We only dated for 1 week before he took me into the woods and forced me to kiss him. I started to feel icky and broke it off that same day. 5 years later, and I've found out that he's now in prison for inappropriate behavior with minors. A year ago, almost to the day, I was offered a new job. It was exactly what I was looking for and I was really excited. They told me they would email the contract, but after a week I hadn't heard anything. After a lot of chasing, they told me they'd changed the structure of the organization, so the position wasn't available. I have a month's notice for my current job, and if I'd taken the new job, my notice period would have been after the cutoff date for furlough in the UK. The new job was in an industry that collapsed through the pandemic, and the industry I work in now has boomed. If I'd received that email, I probably would have been close to bankruptcy now. Phew, well, there were worse things during the pandemic than a dependable job, even if it wasn't one that thrilled you. Lucky miss. I hit a coyote on I-80 going about 80 miles per hour in the middle of the night in Indiana, coming back to Michigan once. I hit the thing dead on and it somehow went under my car and scampered off and lived. The only damage was my bumper was a little bit cracked, which I didn't care about because the bumper was already a bit messed up, so it was no big deal. There was literally fur all over the bumper. I got lucky. Had it been a buck that I'd hit dead on, there's no way my little old Subaru, myself, my girlfriend, or my sister would have been uninjured. I drove much slower and with much more caution after that. That time where I didn't go along for a ride when a friend of mine was running Green Herb, years ago, back when it was more illegal. I was bored and unemployed at the time, and passed on this trip because I had to go to a job interview to be a zombie for Halloween festivities at an amusement park. I got the job, my friend got arrested, and did 30 days in jail. Finishing up my paper route when I was a kid. Walking home on the sidewalk next to a busy road with my sister on the inside, me dragging our little buggy on the outside. Middle of winter, the car jumps the curb and takes out our buggy. Neither of us knew what the heck had just happened other than the ungodly scraping sound and that our buggy was gone. We found out later that the driver saw us run home scared and brought back our buggy, which was utterly destroyed in a crumpled heap. I was pulling the cart and my hand was on it, so I'm not sure how I avoided eating chrome that day. Not a single scratch on me. I still think about it regularly and it's been over 30 years. I found an explosive device in a National Guard training area when I was 14. It had a little pull string and a metal plate to attach it to a tree. I held the thing in my hand and almost pulled the string, but decided to attach it to the tree instead and put it on a longer pull string. I pulled the string and it blew a 5-inch hole in the tree. The explosion was so loud the police came and it made the local news. They didn't catch me. I would have at least lost one hand, maybe both, or worse. What's the worst example of rich people problems that you've seen? My rich friend has had to respray his car multiple times because a peacock on his lawn keeps seeing his reflection in it and attacks it like crazy. I was pumping gas in a rather dicey neighborhood at a cheap gas station, and this older woman pulls up in her Bentley. She pulls up on the pump ahead of me and cracks her window slightly and asks for me to help. I ask her what she needs. She asks me to pump her gas because she was too scared to do it herself. I ask her what type of gas she wanted and she said the cheapest. I asked her if she was sure, with such a high-end car, did she really want to put in budget gas. She said it didn't matter, since she could easily afford any new car she wanted. So I insert my debit card and she hands me a $100 bill and says keep the change. I fill up her tank and my own 12-gallon Honda Civic tank, and I made about $30 from the change. I finish up at the gas station and jump on the freeway to see my girlfriend at the time, and I'm going the same way as this woman. I get off at the same exit as this woman. She's making a right to an affluent area, and I'm making a left off the exit to a less nice area. She rolls down the window and yells at me, "I thought you were following me." "I'm sorry, where are you heading?" I told her which neighborhood I was going to, and she gave an awkward smile and says, "I'll tell the dispatcher that you're not following me, and that I'm not fearing for my life." The B-word called the cops on me, thinking I was following her to rob her. I ended up getting to my destination, chill with my girlfriend, and I didn't get pulled over. I work at a hotel, and whenever I valet a Rolls-Royce or a Bentley, I just think of this old lady. Stuff like this is why if I ever do get to a level of income that could be considered rich, why I won't flaunt it. I wouldn't want to be a paranoid aging dragon of a person clutching my pearls at every turn, while simultaneously trying to show off the same pearls. I knew someone who traded in his Porsche and brought a new one every year. His parents were wealthy and died when he was in his teens, and left him a multi-million-dollar trust fund. What was sad was that he felt like he couldn't pick up women without flashing his cash and expensive sports car, but he would dump them all in a couple of weeks because they were only into me for my money. The loneliest guy I've ever met. And he's not Batman, by the way. His parents died in a car accident and his butler's name is Davin, not Alfred. My wife is a flight attendant. Wife: "What would you like to drink?" Passenger: "I'll have a water." Wait, where is your water from?" My wife: What? What country is your water from? I only drink water from France." Well, I knew the topic would be full of stuff that made me angry, and after this batch, I'm already fuming. Oh well, on to more of these fools with more greenbacks than sense. I went to a fine dining restaurant a few years back that offered us a chance to look at their water menu before dinner. My wife immediately said no because obviously we're not ordering fancy water off the water menu. I'm still kind of disappointed that we didn't at least look at it. That would have been hilarious. Complaining about your allowance from your daddy at age 30, which is the rough equivalent of 2 average salaries. Or complaining that your dad brought you a used car instead of a new one when you were 21, and he only spent $10K. The girl could have been thankful that he even bought her a car. I knew people who brought a new yacht because the wife didn't like the beds on the old one. I knew some who brought a new yacht because the old one had ants and they couldn't find the hive. I mean, this one's a little more understandable. F ants. I would have set the thing on fire. Girl in college lost $6,000 in traveler's checks, but doing the paperwork to have them replaced was too much bother for her. I had friends who had to break their phone. It was the latest iPhone model and perfectly working, but there was a newer one coming out that they wanted, and their parents would only buy it if their other one was broken. I had to endure these kids throwing their phones against walls and being frustrated that their phone wasn't broken yet. My friend wants to marry her boyfriend. They're going to school in America but are both from China, her from Beijing and him from near Shanghai. They both pay $60,000 a year to go to high school here, however she can't marry him because his family only owns 2 houses in Hangzhou, whereas hers owns 7 in Beijing. My rich aunt doesn't let us park in front of her house because it makes her mansion look bad. When I was in high school, my family was pretty poor and I had a fairly rich friend. My single dad spent years saving up for us to go to Disneyland. We finally went when I was 16. Fast forward a year, my friend is going to Disneyland for Halloween break. Her dad told her to invite 2 friends, so she invited me and another girl. I was freaking stoked, but she kept saying, "I don't know, it's probably going to be boring. My grandma takes me to Disneyland like every break." And when we got there, all she wanted to do was sit on benches and text. All of the rides were boring, and she had already been on them dozens of times. It ended up being pretty boring for me because I didn't want to go on the rides without her. A young girl, about 5 years of age, was getting ready to go into New York City to visit her grandmother, New Jersey suburbs. She was at her aunt's house and didn't have a pair of shoes that she liked. She called her chauffeur, told him which pair of shoes she wanted, and the guy got the shoes and drove some 20 miles to deliver them. And she told him he got the wrong ones and he was an idiot. No one in the family thought this was inappropriate. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how a rich kid becomes a spoiled, entitled brat. Watch The Queen of Versailles. It's riveting and it's all about rich people problems. And it's not about Marie Antoinette, as the title would suggest. It's a documentary about a ridiculously rich family before and during the Great Recession, and the effect that the housing crisis had on them. A person I know only drinks Evian or Voss water because he's allergic to tap water. I'm not ripping on him for not drinking tap, but for only drinking what is regarded as luxury water. He lives in a wealthy neighborhood in America. I just find it crazy that he'll only drink certain kinds of bottled water. My cousin's best friend yelled at her dad and said she hated him because he wouldn't take her to London to buy a dress, even though the exact same dress was available from the exact same store back home. She needed the one from London because they just make things better over there. I know someone who has to buy all the surrounding plots of land to get some privacy. Of all the things on here, this makes the most sense to me. You really can't put a price on privacy. Sure you can. It's the cost of all the land surrounding you. Local billionaire Paul Allen wanted to put a helicopter landing pad on his waterfront compound on Mercer Island several years ago, but the city said no. So Paul Allen had a custom-made helicopter landing pad ship built that motors out 100 yards into the lake beyond the city's jurisdiction whenever Paul wants to take off or land via helicopter. Zoning regulations are for normies, apparently. Well, as petty and obnoxious as that is, I've looked up Mercer Island and at least the result is just one obscenely rich person making other rich people angry. I hope the engineers who designed that custom boat charged him a fortune. A super yacht docked in Italy at high-end marina. Owners wanted the bottled Perrier water for a party they were having in a day or two. They wanted the marina to supply them with a pallet of said water. The marina said it was against policy for them to get a pallet of water to their boat. So these people got a private jet from America to fly in pallet of said water and got it dropped to the boat. The price was about $28,000 as far as I remember, but even that amount seems a bit low for that. I had to help a girl pay her tuition bill and she was upset because she genuinely thought the process of putting in credit card information was too difficult. Yeah, she took her dad's credit card and paid $20,000 for the semester like it was buying a stick of gum. I'd put my tuition on my parents' credit card if I could. $40,000 of purchases would give them a nice pile of points, and I'd obviously transfer them the money to pay it off. Drove a client's wife home from the airport after the big snowstorm in Boston this year. I felt so bad as she told me, "Oh, Roger is so sad. They could only clear the snow from in front of 2 of our garage bays. He wanted to take his BMW out, but he's stuck driving my Mercedes for another week." Oh, well, how does he go on? I went on an amazing trip to the southern US with my girlfriend at the time during the summer, and she had an uncle who was very rich, and she was used to all his wealth. I wasn't. I couldn't believe that we got to do all of these amazing things that we did. Money was just not an object or something you had to worry about. The 3rd day of the trip, I was getting aboard his yacht. He owned the largest one in the club, and it was incredible. Glass stairs, stone walls, and dark, beautiful wood. We all sat down near the back at a table and his wife freaked out. She yelled, "Where are the mats?" Apparently there were supposed to be mats set down on the table before the giant glass bowl of chips and freshly made guacamole could be placed in front of us. She was really mad and almost embarrassed. I've never been so weirded out by someone's anger. I couldn't believe it was such a problem to her. I said to myself, "It's fine. Seriously, I could walk in there and grab them in 4 seconds." I'll never forget, and I learned that extremely rich people don't have the same kind of problems that regular people do. I was once friends with a Chinese girl whose family net worth appeared to be in the hundreds of millions of dollars. She told me a story about her rich uncle who owned a super yacht and loved to travel around the world. Apparently his favorite thing to do was pull up into a port and bathe in the stares of everyone admiring his yacht, since it was always the biggest one. Well, one day he goes somewhere, say the Bahamas, and he pulls into the port, and he isn't getting the usual attention since someone else happens to have a bigger yacht than him for once. This girl said it ruined his whole weekend. He was in a terrible mood and couldn't enjoy anything. I was speechless. Also, this girl is the same one that is constantly complaining about how all her friends aren't that smart or nice, and how she doesn't know what to do with all her free time and money. The girl taught me something. Apparently there are a lot of rich people that have so little problems they just make them up. And yeah, I've seen her Facebook pictures, met her friends, seen her cars, and talked to her for long enough to confirm that she probably isn't lying.
You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I had a former friend who went into despair because Hurricane Sandy flooded her living room of her childhood home. Told everyone she was homeless now, and she knew what it felt like to lose everything the way her Jewish ancestors did in World War II. Thing is, she owned another apartment that she lived in on the island. Her parents owned several more vacation homes up and down the coast. They were a little inconvenienced maybe, but far from homeless. I worked for a girl who had a speaker go out in her Ferrari, and she refused to drive any further under these circumstances, so she pulled over to wait for one of her house staff to bring her Porsche. True story. I was invited to a graduation party hosted by a very wealthy couple whose daughter had just graduated from Yale. Her father came out in front of the guests, displaying his Rolex and Cartier watches, asking which one of the 2 expensive watches the group thought would be the more appropriate for the occasion. Everyone just looked at each other silently, not quite sure what to say. Back when the recession hit, one of my very best friend's family was very distraught because they had to sell one of their 3 private jets. I occasionally hung out with a kid whose dad was super rich. He would just ask for money and get it. He tried to use an ATM and had no idea how to, so he asked me or someone else to get the money for him. It was so confusing for him. Most simple tasks were because he was raised to not lift a finger. I knew a guy who had a friend or roommate like that. He recognized the opportunity and had kind of turned himself into an informal personal assistant. He took care of all the details of making things happen for his rich kid friend, while skimming a reasonable living for himself.
The way he described it, it didn't sound like he was doing anything unethical. He was just maximizing his friend's enjoyment of spending his allowance, part of the cost of which was paying for his time managing the details of setting up parties, trip planning, researching products, and other things. Honestly, back in the day I'd kind of thought about whether I would enjoy being a butler-type figure for someone rich. I can see the charm in the lifestyle. I enjoy looking after people and cooking and being useful. But then I realized that the kind of client or duties you end up with would really be such a roll of the dice, with some potentially unpleasant results in terms of people and workload. I worked for a non-profit that helped extremely low-income women start their own business. These women would give up food to scrape together enough money to join our program. One of our EDs said she wished she could relate to the clients more, but she's never been poor. She owned 2 homes in one of the most expensive zip codes in the US. Also, another woman, who I really did respect but I didn't always agree with, believed people chose to be in poverty. We would debate for days about that statement. I realized working there that people who run advocacy programs for poverty have no idea what it's really like to be in it. This is a problem because policy and lawmakers are looking at these institutions for advisement on drafting new social safety nets and welfare programs to help the working poor, and they just have no clue. It motivated me to go back and get a master's degree to fight this. I grew up super poor and can speak from experience, not theory. My boss complained to me recently that they owned too much land and too many properties. She's like, "Don't own too much land and properties. It's just a hassle." A kid I know claimed he wasn't rich, saying, "I don't get to pilot my helicopters as much anymore." The guy sitting next to him, when prompted to define an income bracket for middle class, couldn't answer. He eventually arrived at a $700,000 annual income as a rough estimate. I live in the part of my country where internet is really expensive. 16 megabit per second plans are considered plans for extremely rich people. One fine day, one of my friends threw a fit at his dad because he was getting 15 megabits per second instead of 16 for like an hour. I mean, holy crap, I live on a 2 megabit per second connection, which turns into 512 kilobits per second connection after a 30 gigabyte data cap. I just moved to a 50 megabit per second from a 2 megabit per second. Life is not the same anymore. I saw a guy on Instagram who couldn't wait for a car he custom ordered, so he went and bought one from the dealer while he waited for the custom one. My old boss did this. He ordered a brand new BMW M5, and while he was waiting for it to be delivered, he brought a nearly new Maserati Quattroporte. When the BMW arrived, he had no more need for the Maserati, so he sold it, and bought a Bentley Flying Spur with the money. This is the same guy who brought a Ferrari 575 Super America and drives it around like it's an everyday car. I don't know if this is a problem exactly, but I was on the tube in South London and a bunch of young banker types in fancy suits were there with their equally well-dressed arm-candy girlfriends. And one guy was like, "Everyone keeps telling me to get a Bentley, but I'm more of a Lambo man." This was at a point in my life where I was living off $1 boxes of pasta from Tesco, so it was a bit of a surreal moment. Oh man, I work at a place where I interact with a lot of rich people. I've come into contact with lots of rich people problems. Here's a few that I've witnessed. I overheard some ladies saying, "Oh, they can be expensive, but buying nicer cars like Porsches and Mercedes is worth it. We had a GMC once and we only drove it for like 4 years and we had to have something fixed and it just felt old." Also, a mum saying, "I took her to a little friend's birthday party, but I didn't know what to bring. Do kids like Coach bags still? I have no idea." Some other ladies, "So what are you ladies doing this summer?" "Oh, nothing. Last summer was crazy, so this summer we're taking it easy. We're spending 1 week in London and 1 week in Hawaii. But other than that, nothing. We're relaxing this summer." And finally, a 14-year-old kid who looked despondent, and when I asked him what was wrong, he replied, "We're going to Paris again. I hate it. It's so boring." There are many more, but those are a few. My London friend is having a baby, and she's upset that Jimmy Choo doesn't make diaper bags. My mum works at a Baptist church. The pastor makes somewhere between 90 to 100K a year with all of his insurance and gas paid. He is rich as heck, owns 2 homes and has a ton of money on top of his salary. When he takes mission trips and pastor conventions, he holds offerings to pay for his airfare and everything else. Meanwhile, other people that come with him pay their own way. This is a church full of poor and retired people. Well, I'd say that's something you don't hear about all the time, but I'm pretty sure that half the ministers of the megachurches in America are obscenely wealthy and see no fault in wringing out every last cent from their congregation on a regular basis. My buddy had to rent a cabin for his ski trip because his mum just had theirs redecorated for a magazine spread, which hadn't been photographed yet. The same guy couldn't remember which company card he'd put his $4,000 adult nightclub tab on. He really needs an assistant to help keep track of these things. He's interviewed some, but he hasn't hired one yet. Last week was rough. To all those who say they'd want to be his assistant, unless you're a masochist, no, you wouldn't. For every time you'd get to go to that club with the bunch of absolute D-bags he's entertaining, you will have picked his kid up from preschool about 20 times, or double-checked a few reams of paperwork, or stayed on the phone trying to get a hold of some bureaucrat or another, or any of a few other dozen boring tasks that you'll probably have to do 3 at a time. And on top of that, you'd have to deal with King Butthole as your boss. No, not my friend. Inexplicably, he's turned out to be a really good person. No, your real boss would be his dad, who tends to treat everyone that doesn't have at least his net worth worse than garbage, especially his employees. You'd get blamed for every little problem until you're losing your crap and quit, and they'll just pick the next ambitious MBA they could find to take your place. I seriously wouldn't wish that job on my worst enemy. You might think you're tough-minded and could handle it, but you'd be the type that gets broken the hardest. And it would be harder than it should be, because my friend is such a nice guy, and you'd know that if it weren't for you, he'd bear the brunt of it, and those times that are good are really, really good. I'm a nanny for a rich family. A few examples I have. When I get paid, in cash, my boss says, "Oh dear, now I'm going to have to go all the way to the bank to get more cash." Not wanting to go to the bank isn't the annoying rich thing. It was an annoying rich thing because she had $500 still in her wallet, and it was annoying that she was complaining it wasn't enough money to have in her wallet. When they travel, they prefer 2-bedroom suites. One time, they could only get 1 bedroom, and they said, "Well, this just ruins the whole trip." My car got broken into, and I mentioned it felt so awful to drive it knowing someone had been in it. His idea of emphasizing, "Oh, that happened to me. I had to buy a new one." The movie This Is 40. "Honey, we're in debt and both our businesses are operating at a loss." "Okay, let's go spend the night at a nearby luxury hotel and order room service." I was at a marina in the Bahamas to do laundry, stock up on water and supplies with my 25-year-old beta sailboat, and I was walking the dog when I met a guy walking his dog. He was off a 140-foot boat with a substantial, crisply uniformed crew and could not stop complaining how the Bahamas government had charged him $250 for a 6-month cruising permit and fishing license. The same rate I paid, by the way. He went on and on, how they don't have lighthouses or buoys, etc. He had to be paying that much to dock for the night, let alone crew and fuel. Boat probably cost $10 million or more. I ended the conversation by saying that I'd paid more than that for the bottom paint which kept barnacles from growing on my hull. A friend of mine who has considerably more money than me, although admittedly that doesn't take much, was always asking me to come on expensive trips with her, and I had to keep turning her down because I couldn't afford it. She'd say stuff like, "Oh, go on, treat yourself," and I'd have to explain that I literally don't have the money. It's not that I can't or don't want to spend it, it doesn't exist in my bank account. I eventually had to sit her down and explain that I'm poor. I told her about how I couldn't afford to buy much food, so during work days I'd live off the fruit tree and coffee at the office. I showed her how all of my shoes have holes, so I'd line them with plastic bags to stop the rain getting in. I explained that I cut my own hair and washed my own clothes in water with no detergent. I pointed out that I'd long ago put all of my possessions that had any sort of value on eBay. I wasn't trying to get sympathy, I was only trying to explain why for the 100th time I was turning down her invitation for shopping trips or girls' nights or weekends away. She looked at me and nodded in understanding. I know what you mean. Things have been really tight for me recently. I'm so skint at the moment that I've had to cut my weekly manicure and spa days down to just 2 a month.
What insane ways has the universe indicated that it could kill you at any time? I once had an elevator drop more than 10 floors rapidly before deciding to work properly. Let me explain. This happened to me at the Land Title building in downtown Philadelphia. I was visiting a friend on the 20th floor, and around floor 15, the elevator suddenly makes a fatigued groaning sound before dropping. Fast. Scared the ever-loving pee out of me as I rocketed down to floor 5 before it slowed, stopped, and reversed course back up again. I noped. I hit the button for every floor so the fricking thing would just let me off, and I walked down the stairs and out of the building. I never did get to visit my friend. What random horrors has the universe subjected you to, only to say, haha, got ya, right before the point of no return? And don't tell me this didn't or can't happen. It happened. When I was 10, I was on a helicopter visiting an island off the south coast of England. Everything was going smoothly until the helicopter turns on its side and proceeds to nosedive for a good 10 seconds toward the sea. Needless to say, this had everyone screaming and scared crapless. The helicopter suddenly levels off and the pilot comes onto the PA system and says, "Oh, sorry people, I could have sworn I spotted a dolphin. Won't happen again." I now hate helicopters. I think I've played Battlefield 3 with this guy. I'm a private pilot. One time I was nearing the airport to land. I hit the switch to put the landing gear down and only 2 lights showed up, indicating that the 2 main gears were down, but the nose gear was not coming down as well. So, if all else fails, I'd either have to raise the gear and do a belly landing, or do a landing with only 2 gears, which would be even more dangerous. But first I went back away from the airport to try and work out the problem if possible. I tried raising the gear and re-lowering it. Same problem. 2 lights but no nose gear. Because the gear comes down from the force of gravity, I tried pulling a few Gs to force it down. Nothing. I tried wiggling the rudder since the turning mechanism is connected to the nose gear. Nothing. Maybe a few more Gs? Nothing. Finally, I remembered what the instructor had told me in passing when I was getting checked out in this particular aircraft. The lights for the gear are interchangeable, so that if one is burnt out, you can switch them around. So I went to switch them just in case the nose gear light was burnt out. As soon as I touched the light to change it, it came on. Whew. In the end, the light wasn't all the way into the socket, and that's what the problem was. I did a low pass over the tower so they could visually check that the gear was down just to be sure. I landed successfully in the end. In conclusion, landing gear wouldn't come down on my plane. Turned out that the light showing the gear's position was faulty, and I discovered it as I was at the end of my options before deciding on an emergency gear-up landing. I have a feeling that anyone who's entertaining ideas of getting their pilot's license is probably going to get a good brief of things that might put them off that particular vocation here. It's definitely not something for the light-hearted. I once studied abroad in Cyprus, and during Thanksgiving break I decided to go to Spain for the week. No one else wanted to go, so I went alone. It was incredible. I saw Madrid, Toledo, Sevilla, Granada, and Barcelona, in that order. I was supposed to take a bus back to Madrid to catch my flight back to Cyprus the next day. When I got to the bus station with all of my luggage, to take the last bus of the night around midnight, I noticed my wallet had been stolen. I had it when I got on the subway, so between getting on the subway and 10 minutes later when I got off and walked to the bus station, someone had taken it from me. My cash, debit card, and credit card were all stolen. I had no way of making purchases. My prepaid phone was out of minutes. I was effectively homeless in a foreign country. I went into the nearest bar where I told the bartender my story. He drove me back to his place after his shift ended at 3 a.m. He looked up the next available train and gave me €150 to pay for said train, subway tickets, and food. He drove me to the train station, I got on the train and made my flight the next day. I've since wired him back his money. If it weren't for his kindness, I'd be living on the street in Barcelona begging for change. How about the next time this happens, if you don't find a nice bartender, you go to the embassy before panhandling? I was studying abroad on a cruise ship, semester at sea program, and crossing the Pacific in the middle of winter. Spent about a week pitching and rolling on 30 to 40 foot high waves. It wasn't uncommon to pitch 45 degrees to the right, only to get tossed back 45 degrees to the left. At one point, we got caught between 2 bad storms and hit with a rogue wave. It was over 80 feet high and crashed out the windows on the bridge and caused some electrical issues that stopped our engines. Tremendous damage to the rest of the ship. I was sleeping at the time and my bed ripped out of the wall. We prepared to abandon ship into lifeboats, and I knew that we were all dead if we did that, as the Coast Guard was about a day out and there was no way the lifeboats would survive the rough waters. Literally, as we're getting ready to go out on deck and board the lifeboats, one of the engines starts working again and we don't have to evacuate. We literally zigzagged our way to Hawaii and spent 2 weeks chilling while the boat was repaired. I was once young and kind of a moron. My friends and I loved to play in construction sites. Many of the neighborhoods in the area I grew up in were just being developed. Anyway, so we're messing around and we see these dump trucks dumping lots of black dirt, topsoil for lawns. So we're playing on the dirt piles, being little monsters, when a truck backs up and dumps a full truckload of dirt right on me.
Even as a little nerd, I understood the immediate, overpowering, screaming urge to get the frick out now, now, now. I was running, scrambling, falling on this moving dirt pile, trying to reach the edge before it buried me completely. Which it did. I thought the classic line, "Oh, this is how I die. Weird." Just my hand was sticking out when the dirt stopped pouring. I immediately felt my friend's hands clawing the dirt away, and it couldn't have been more than a few seconds, but it felt like eternity. I now understand the reason why people get trampled and whatnot in disasters. I don't like to think about it, but I probably would have pushed my own mother out of the way. I was so overcome with a singular thought: survive. When I was about 15, I took a trip to Vermont with my grandparents and my similarly aged cousin. We decided to go to one of those scenic overlooks that's nearby. It turns out to be a 50-foot-tall waterfall. Scenic overlooks not really being our thing, my cousin and I decided to ditch the geezers and climb around behind the fall and check out the view from the top. We make it up there, grab onto a tree, and waved our arms madly to catch the attention of the old folks. At the same time they glance up, my cousin slips towards the falls. I grab him, but end up losing my footing and falling into the water myself. As the rushing water carries me towards what I assume to be our imminent death, my right foot gets caught between a couple of larger rocks and the water pushes me upright. I find myself standing not 15 feet from the edge of the falls, grandparents in plain sight, and I start yelling at them to take a picture. At that point, I was almost literally crapping my pants. I don't know if anyone else has seen their grandmother screaming in utter terror, but I honestly hope not. My cousin pulled me out with a large branch a few moments later, and we were in serious crap. After the crisis-averted stage, we joined my grandparents on the wooden overlook. Clearly visible from that side of the falls was a giant sign on which all of the names of the people who had died from falling off said waterfall were printed. In conclusion, almost fell off a waterfall, but my leg got caught and saved me. I took a mastodonic bowel movement at a girlfriend's parents' house, and after flushing, as the water level rose and rose and rose, I looked frantically for a plunger. Her family must have been small, delicate poopers, because there was not a plunger to be found. The water level got right to the tip-top and stopped. Fortunately, there was a wire hanger on a hook on the wall. I fashioned it into a makeshift plumbing snake and I rooted out the clog. I rinsed the business end in the sink and reassembled the wire hanger as best as I could. Pulled up my pants, washed my hands, and a spritz of Febreze to kill the stench. Crisis averted. I can't help but notice that the stakes in this last one weren't quite as high as some of the others, but I do recognize the terror of doing this kind of thing in a high-pressure social situation, and I appreciate that it probably felt like a life-threatening situation at the time. I once fell through the ice when I was around 11 years old and I didn't know how to swim. I flailed around wildly and started screaming at the top of my lungs. Then I noticed that the water was only about chest high. Still, it was a fricking cold walk home. I'm surprised I didn't get hypothermia. About 10 years ago, I went for a routine clinic screening because I'm responsible and stuff. The doctor comes out with that horrible bad news face that they all seem to get and just stands in front of me for a minute, clearing his throat and looking uncomfortable. He starts to say something twice while looking at the chart. I'm afraid that, well, it isn't good. He clasps the chart in front of him and appears ready to say something. I glance at it quickly and make out the words transmitted and disease a few times. Suddenly, a nurse kind of jogs out of the office, takes the chart from the doctor and hands him another one, gives me a smile and then walks back inside. The doctor looks at the new chart, grins like a kid given the day off school and says cheerily, "Well, looks like you're all clean." A friend of mine and I were kayaking in the Gulf of Mexico, and I thought we were about to be eaten by sharks. We saw like 6 dorsal fins approaching, and it wasn't until they were about 10 feet away that we realized they were dolphins. You weren't out of the woods. Dolphins love to play, except play for a 600-pound lump of high-speed, ocean-going muscle is not the sort of thing your bones will take much of. You're all, "Look at me, I'm a helpless sack of bones who can't swim with skinny, brittle appendages." And the dolphin is like, "Aw, sweet, bro, let's do flips. I'll totally throw ya, since I weigh 4 times as much and I don't really have a mental concept of broken arm on account of not really having arms." You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I was once driven off the highway by a woman driving a minivan and simultaneously doing her makeup. I drove for a while in the grassy median zone before being able to jerk back onto the highway. When I looked at the lady again, she looked sad and apologetic, sort of like a puppy when it knows it's chewed on your favorite sandals. Doesn't change the fact that she almost killed me, of course. I had a stroke at the age of 22 in September, but no permanent damage. Real funny, universe. I've got two. I was trapped on an escalator for 10 minutes one time between two floors. I thought I wasn't going to make it. The second one was when I was on an overnight flight coming home. Not many people, and an off-duty flight attendant was in the window seat, asleep. We're on final approach and over the end of the runway when the plane suddenly rolls what feels like 90 degrees. I guess it couldn't have been that steep, but the overhead luggage racks pop open and some loose bags go flying, and before anyone can even scream, the place rolls back level and lands. Maybe 10 seconds tops. The flight attendant wakes up and looks around, and we make eye contact, and I swear she says, "New pilot." I was totally stunned and pretty sure I peed my pants. Taking a trip through the mountains with the wife, now my ex-wife, in the biggest piece of crap car we'd ever owned. We were about 4 hours from home, going through a small town, when the brakes fail. Thankfully, the car was a 5-speed manual, so I start shifting down to slow down. I spotted an auto parts store while I was coasting, judged it just right and pulled in and parked using the building to finally stop the car. It was a very gentle tap. I then proceeded to jack the rear of the car up and investigate. The rear brakes were completely shot, including the wheel cylinders. Went into the store, bought what I needed for repairs, new brake shoes, cylinder rebuild kits, and some brake fluid. I then proceeded to do a brake job on my car with nothing more than a Leatherman and a full-size, flat-tip screwdriver. This was a mum-and-pup parts store, no loaner tools. I was back on the road within the hour. I guess this was more of a "frick you, universe" story. Years ago, I was taking a break from kayaking, swimming in a river with a bunch of people all around me. I was next to a big pipe running under the water, actually called pipeline. Still not sure the exact reason for the pipe, but I was slowly being pulled to the left. Not thinking of it much, I let it pull me when all of a sudden I'm completely submerged, being sucked down into it. But a random metal rod jabbed into my chest. I hung on to it for dear life with one hand and with the other hand reached out of the pipe to feel around, and I actually feel a handle to pull myself out. When I got out and sat on top of the pipe, I looked around and noticed that everything was crystal clear, and no one had even noticed that I'd almost died right then. Quite the thrill. In Iraq, an IED had gone off on the lead vehicle of the convoy. Once the medevac was called in, another Marine and I went to check the kill zone and the area around the LZ. After a few minutes of looking for wires or detonators, I realized I was standing on a sandbag in the median road. I'd walked on about 7 other sandbags. It was the remains of the IED that had hit the lead vehicle. It was a daisy chain where only one went off. I was walking on them. That was a real pucker factor. The only thing I can think of is a 5.7 earthquake in a building rated for 6. For some reason, I just pictured all buildings having an official rating, and if a quake goes over that rating, the building disintegrates immediately. I have no idea why I find the idea amusing. When I was 16, I started taking birth control pills. A month later, right before my spring break, my left hand started to turn purple and got incredibly painful. At the hospital, after many tests, they found I had a blood clot from damn birth control. They perform an angiogram to search for any more clots. In the process, they discover a freak genetic deformity. I had extra rib bones growing off my spine, and they were pushing on my main artery under my clavicle, resulting in 2 aneurysms, one on each side. After a handful of surgeries, discarding rib bones and removing the aneurysms, they tell me I'm lucky to be alive. The best spring break ever. In short, taking birth control saved my life. I know many people who would echo the same sentiment, but for very different reasons, so congratulations. I hope you found a control method that worked for you. Coming back home from Iraq after my second tour, we stopped in Newfoundland in January. Blizzard-like conditions, we're taking off, and as soon as we get off the ground, the plane falls back onto the runway. The pilot comes on over the net and says, "Well, that was a little weird. We're gonna try and pull off and make sure that everything is okay." Rev up the engines, and then went around for another try. I figured after a 16-month tour, surviving multiple IED attacks, countless firefights, this is where I die. In Canada. Obviously, I made it back okay. But still, flying scares me.
One time the brakes went out in a 15-year-old used car I used to own. Of course I was speeding and the light turned yellow. I hit the brakes and they didn't work, but then they locked up. I did a massive 180-degree going all the way across the intersection, coming to a complete stop perpendicular to a car, staring the driver in the face. I laughed, turned around, and drove slowly the rest of the way home. I have one. I got stranded in the Salt Lake Airport once. I was looking at a 23-hour wait for my flight home to Boston, due to snowfall. Suddenly, after repeatedly asking the clerk to find us an alternate route, one opened up that would get us out of Salt Lake and give us an 8-hour layover in Vegas instead. I went from my worst airport moment ever to my greatest in the span of an hour. That clerk is my hero. Part 2, the Vegas to Boston flight ended up having us fly very near major storms in Texas and Oklahoma. The pilots let us know there's going to be turbulence. I somehow find it in me to fall asleep. I woke up with a massive thud from turbulence, and about a second later the plane begins to fall. I went weightless, and my seatbelt kept me strapped in. My wife let out a scream, so do others. I think, this is it, this is how it happens. And then, we regained control. The whole event lasted about 5 seconds. Turbulence backs off a few minutes later and we make it to Boston safe and sound. So, in conclusion, stranded in Salt Lake due to a blizzard. That's bad. Rerouted to Vegas with 8 hours to rip it up. That's good. Plane home to Boston starts falling from the sky. That's bad. Plane levels off and everyone hugs each other. Can I go now? I used to work in a fiberglass testing lab around buckets and buckets of the most flammable stuff you can imagine. Gasoline, ethanol, methanol, etc. There were open 5-gallon buckets of the stuff everywhere on the floor, and the walls were jammed with cabinets holding dozens of metal canisters of explosive liquids in storage. The job was dull. By the vent hood, we kept an old radio plugged into the hood sparkless outlet, and it was our sole entertainment. One day, a guy wheeled past in his chair and caught the radio cord. 5 of us watched the radio, still plugged in, bounce and teeter on the rim of a full 5-gallon bucket of xylene, then slowly pirouette away from the rim and hit the floor. A couple of millimeters to the left and we would have been vaporized. My supervisor, Jerry, one of the least flappable people ever, looked at us and said calmly, "We're gonna need to tape that to the wall." My girlfriend and I were driving to Vegas from San Francisco via Death Valley in a rental car. We were visiting the country. Anyway, we were 30 miles into Death Valley at around 6 p.m. when I realized we probably wouldn't have enough gas to make it to the next gas station, which was roughly 100 miles away. So after driving for another half hour or so, the blinking lights came on, indicating we were on reserve fuel. My girlfriend starts freaking out because our cell phones have no service, and there isn't anyone who we knew to call anyway. So we stopped at the deserted RV park in the middle of Death Valley to try and get some help, all while genuinely fearing running into a bunch of crazy hobos and getting robbed, kidnapped, or murdered. So anyway, the place is devoid of people, so we continue driving on reserve towards BC, Nevada. Eventually, the car grinds to a halt and we end up having to pull over to get help. We try flagging down cars for 45 minutes to no avail, until finally some truck that passes us suddenly pulls over and backs up to us. I explain our predicament to him and beg him to drive us to BC and back. By this time it was dark and the guy, a really friendly-looking Latino dude, senses that we're desperate and does us the favor. When we actually got to the gas station in BC, my girlfriend was so relieved that she started crying. I proceeded to buy a 2-gallon watering can and filled it up with gas. Later, the guy drives us all the way back. He did roughly 40 miles there and back to our car. At this point, I was so grateful that I offered him $200, to which he flat out refused and even offered to tail us to BC in case we ran out of gas again. We managed to get to Vegas in the end after being on the road for about 14 hours. But this incident really shook us, but also reminded us that there are truly good Samaritans out there. Jose, if you ever come across this post, I just want to let you know you're an awesome guy. I was on a Navy C-2, a propeller plane, flying back to the carrier with the mail. There are no windows in the cargo section of this plane. Suddenly, in mid-flight, I'm blinded with bright daylight and roaring wind all around me. In a split second, I'm in the crash position out of reflex. I open my eyes and see the sunlight on the floor with bits of newspaper and dust being thrown about by the wind. I hear the engines start to wind down and I feel like the seatbelt is the only thing keeping me from floating out of the seat as the plane starts to plummet. This lasts for a few seconds, but then the plane levels out and the aircrew guys are moving around me. One of them asks if I'm okay and if it hit me. It turns out an overhead escape hatch had come unlatched and landed in the row of seats in front of me. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.